Chapter 136. Ian did not know what to do for a moment. He stood there and did not dare to move. He only felt that the place where his lips had touched was burning hot. Xiao Ju also froze. She stood there without moving. Her beautiful eyes drooped, and no one could tell what her expression was. However, Big Brother laughed and said, "Why are you standing there? This young master has already arrived." Xiao Ju seemed to come back to her senses. She let go of his hand as if she had been stung by a bee. She turned around coldly and said, "Let's go." Ian replied with an "oh." He covered up the turbulent waves in his heart and pretended that nothing had happened. He followed behind Xiao Ju. However, he was screaming in his heart. She actually kissed Xiao Ju? Although it was only on the forehead, such an intimate contact was really hard to ignore. Even if it was just an accident, this accident came at the wrong time. They had just crossed Lover's Bridge. If the water god saw this, he might really think that they were lovers. Ian shivered. Xiao Ju did not know if it was because of what had happened just now. She walked very quickly. Ian could only quicken his pace to follow her. When they returned to Cui Yuji's side, the people who had been watching the show clapped. Cui Yuji also laughed and said, "Huanqing, you are indeed a son of the Cui family. You passed it on your first try. I was still thinking that if you did not succeed this time, you would not dare to do it next time. Ha ha ha. I did not expect that you would pass Lover's Bridge so smoothly." Ian thought to himself that he was even thinking about the next time. This Lover's Bridge really had no bottom line. "This is good." Concubine Wei smiled and patted He Yan's hand. "After crossing Lover's Bridge with young Master Huanqing, we will not be separated even if we go to the ends of the earth." Ian, it was really scary. Chi Wu and Fei Nu were also speechless. Only Lin Shuanghe was overjoyed. Waving his fan, he said, "Even I want to take a walk." "Then you go," He Yin said angrily. Just now, Lin Shuanghe did not hesitate to kick up a fuss. "That's fine," Lin Shuanghe said reservedly. "There are so many things in the world. Why should we drink all of them? This bridge doesn't fit me. Moreover, where am I going to find a girl who can carry me across the bridge?" "Xiao Ju, shut up." Ian did not dare to say anything. This joke was too embarrassing. Fortunately, when they were getting off the bridge at the end, they were far away. Everyone only saw that she almost fell and Xiao Ju caught her, so they didn't see the mark on her forehead. Otherwise, if Lin Shuanghe made a joke about it, she would be too ashamed to show her face. Since we finished crossing Lover's Bridge, let's take a look at the other activities of the Water God Festival. Cui Yueji smiled. "Look, this is the market square on the water." Jiang was close to the water, so boats of all sizes were already docked on the river. At the stern of the boat, there were people sitting and rowing. At the bow of the boat, there were all kinds of snacks, fruits, or jewelry. If someone on the shore took a fancy to something, they would wave their hand, and the boat would stop by the shore, allowing the guest to carefully choose. If a tourist on the boat took a fancy to something, both boats would stop in the middle, and the hawkers on the boat would let them choose. He Yin saw a small boat selling horseshoe-shaped pastries wrapped in large green leaves. The pastries were embedded with Chinese yams and red dates, and sprinkled with a thin layer of honey. They looked very tempting. Cui Yueji saw that she liked them, so he asked his servant to stop the boat on the shore and buy a few packets. He Yin took the packet, thanked him, and took a bite. Immediately, she felt the fragrance in her mouth and cheeks. It was so sweet that it made her salivate. She sighed inwardly. Compared to these pastries, the cakes that she and He Yunxing sold in Shuajing were very ordinary. She ate seriously. Her mouth was puffed up like a squirrel. Xiao Ju couldn't stand it anymore and said, "There's pastry crumbs on your mouth." "What?" Ian didn't hear clearly. The next moment, Xiao Ju angrily threw a handkerchief at her face. "Wipe it clean. It's so embarrassing." "Ian," she wiped her mouth and said, "There's so much trouble." As she said that, she heard a burst of exclamations from the other side. She turned around and saw a horse racing field. There were many people surrounding it. She didn't know what they were doing. She pointed to the other side and asked, "What's that over there?" "That." Cui Yueji looked in the direction she pointed and said, "This is called Snatch the Wind." "What Snatch the Wind?" "Look, there are many horses in the horse racing field." Cui Yueji smiled and said, "The horse track is a circle. In the middle is a high platform. There's a flag on the high platform. You have to ride a horse. When you pass by the high platform, you have to jump up and snatch the flag. After you get the flag, you have to jump down from the high platform. It's best if you land on the horse's back. If you can get the flag in the specified time, you have to successfully snatch the wind. If you can successfully snatch the wind, you'll get a good prize. Next to it is a copper kettle. The shorter the time, the better the prize. Tian listened and said softly, "Isn't this a battle for the flag?" Lin Shuanghe waved his fan and asked with a smile, "It sounds interesting, but what kind of prizes are there?" "There are all kinds of prizes. If a man wants something for himself, it's mostly weapons. Sometimes there's also silver. If a man wants something for a woman, it's mostly jewelry, or cloth." As Cui Yuezhi spoke, he led a few people to the horse racing field. The horse racing field in Jiang was not big. It was not as big as the training field at the foot of Mount Baiwei in Liangzhou. However, there were already many people surrounding it. In front of them, a few men dressed in martial arts clothes were riding past them. The horses stirred up a gust of wind. When they passed by the high platform, a few people jumped up and competed to be the first to reach the top of the flagpole. The flagpole was very high. There was no place to land, so they had to rely on their martial arts to get up. One of them reached the top of the flagpole and fell down before he could even grab the flag. He fell into the sand pit below the stage. The other person, on the other hand, barely managed to pull the flag with his hand before falling down. He didn't get to ride a horse and only received a string of copper coins as a prize. On the other side, there was a table with all kinds of prizes for snatching the wind. There was a dazzling lineup of everything. At a glance, Hien saw that there was a whip at the very top. The whip was very long and looked very tough. It was oily purple and looked very useful. Hien was afraid that his identity would be exposed, so he could not use a sword. Most of the time, he used a whip. However, the whips in the training field were not considered treasures. This whip looked much better than the ones he used before. Hien was instantly tempted. She asked the owner of the horse racing field, "Excuse me, what's the prize for this whip?" The owner of the horse racing field laughed and said, "Miss, you have good taste. This is our biggest prize for snatching the wind this time. The purple jade whip is in the copper pot's hourglass. If you can grab the flag in the shortest time, you will get this whip. Today, many young men came for this whip. However, no one has taken it yet. I think it will be difficult today." When she asked, everyone looked at her. Cui Yuezhi smiled and said, "Yin, do you like this whip?" "I think it looks very special," Yin said modestly. "Why don't you let Huanqing compete for it for you?" Cui Yuezhi smiled and said, "I have seen Huanqing's foundation. He should have practiced martial arts before. He should not be afraid to go up." After all, Cui Yuezhi was also a martial artist. He could see the other party's skills clearly. Yin looked at Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju said coldly, "Don't even think about it." "I've already started to think about it." Yin approached him and begged in a low voice, "Help me get this whip for me. With this whip, it will be easier for me to work for you in the future. If it wasn't for the fact that everyone here is male, I would definitely do it myself." Commander-in-Chief, General, Young Master, Husband? Xiao Ju said, "Shut up." Yin could only shut up. His gaze turned and landed on the purple jade whip again. He was extremely envious. Sometimes, it was not easy to come across a good weapon, especially one that could be obtained for free without any effort. It was a once-in-a-decade opportunity. Wouldn't it be a pity to miss it? However, today was her period. Her abdomen was a little uncomfortable, but it should be bearable. He deliberated for a while. If he could get the flag in the shortest time possible, it would only hurt for a short while. It was still okay. Thinking of this, he smiled and asked the owner of the horse ranch, "May I ask if women can participate?" The owner of the horse ranch was stunned. The people around him were also stunned. The owner of the horse ranch hesitated and said, "Yes, but no one has ever done this before." Xiao Ju turned her head and looked at him in disbelief. "Are you crazy?" "I have no choice," Yin said helplessly, "but I think that it will be very difficult to encounter this whip in the future." "Don't worry, you know my ability. This kind of small situation is not difficult for me." Aren't you? At this point, he seemed to find it difficult to speak and didn't continue. Ian looked at him strangely. Not what? She raised her hand to tie up her hair. It was inconvenient to have long hair. As for her clothes, she could only tie them up first. Just as she raised her hand, Xiao Ju grabbed her elbow. "What's wrong?" Ian asked. Xiao Ju endured and stared at her like a knife. She said word by word, "I will go." Ian was stunned. Before he could say anything, Xiao Ju walked forward and said something to the owner of the horse ranch. "Huanqing wants to seize the wind?" Cui Yuezhi was surprised. "For the whip that Yin likes?" Yin was speechless. In fact, although she had begged Xiao Ju, she did not expect Xiao Ju to do this kind of thing. A general who was in charge of tens of thousands of soldiers was doing this. Moreover, second young master Xiao had always been proud and would not be interested in this kind of thing. She did not expect him to really go. The owner of the horse ranch brought Xiao Ju inside to get the horse. Concubine Wei smiled and said with envy, "Young Master Huanqing treats Miss Yin very well." What he said wasn't wrong, but for a moment, Yin was confused. Lin Xuanhe looked at Yin and then looked in the direction that Xiao Ju had gone. He stopped fanning himself and stood there thoughtfully. Not long after, Xiao Ju came out on horseback. It was spring, a field of fresh green, warm and velvety. The handsome, noble young master lit up the surrounding spring scenery. Today, in order to cater to Jiang's Water God Festival, he didn't wear a long robe. Instead, he wore casual clothes, which made him look even more elegant and charming. His gaze was lazy and cold as he sat upright on the horse's back. He immediately attracted everyone's attention. Yin heard a woman exclaim behind him, "What a handsome young master! His eyebrows are handsome, and he looks noble. When did Jiang have such a person? Which family's young master is he?" When Yin heard this, he felt honored. A poem appeared in his mind. The spring grass is green, and the clouds are white. Thinking of the gentleman riding a horse, he looks good. He suddenly remembered when he was young at the Xianchang Pavilion. They hunted in the winter, and the one who hunted the most game would be rewarded. Xiao Ju alone came out on top. At that time, Yin could barely draw his bow and shoot an arrow. In the end, he did not hunt a single game. He could only follow the crowd's shocked and envious gazes as he watched the young man walk out from the snow. He was dressed in brocade and a fox fur coat, looking very charming. Many years had passed, but he was still the same. As long as he stood in a crowd, he would become the most dazzling person. No matter how many things had happened, a pearl could not be covered in dust. Xiao Ju rode his horse around the horse ranch. At this time, besides the men, many women also gathered around to see Xiao Ju. Lin Xuanhe walked to Yan's side and said in a low voice, "Little sister, you are amazing. Xiao Huaijin is actually willing to stand in the limelight for you." Yan was surprised. I also did not expect him to help. Who would have thought? She suspected that Xiao Ju was also possessed. But looking at how he treated her before, it did not seem like it. "Are you very touched and want to repay him with your body?" Yan was shocked and wanted to refute loudly. Suddenly, he remembered that Cui Yu and the others were still around. He could not be presumptuous. He replied in a low voice, "No, I don't like the martial governor." "If you don't like him, then why are you so nervous?" Lin Xuanhe said mischievously, "Brother, your ears are red." Yan quickly covered his ears with both hands. "It's not like that. Don't talk nonsense." At this time, they suddenly heard a burst of exclamations from the crowd. The two of them looked in the direction of the sound and saw that Xiao Ju had already galloped to the foot of the high platform. He did not stop and directly flew up. The slippery long pole was as if he was walking on flat ground. Although the people around them were relaxed, it was not easy to go up. They had never seen such a scene and such an easy person. He was extremely fast like lightning, and in the blink of an eye, he was already at the top of the pole. He then stepped on the end of the pole and casually pulled down the red flag. The wind blew, and the flag flew in his hand. For a moment, the young man's face overlapped with that of the bright and beautiful youth in the spring. His eyes were unfocused, and he slightly raised his eyebrows. He looked at the people below the platform, or perhaps he was just looking at Yin. He smiled and said, "I got it." Yin looked at him in a daze. For a moment, she could hear the sound of her own heartbeat. It was so loud that it was difficult to ignore. In her mind, she suddenly remembered the lesson she had listened to when she was young in the Xianchongguan. It was written in the record of the passing of the lamp. The sixth ancestor, Hui Neng, lived in the Dharma temple for the first time. There were two monks arguing. One cloud moved the wind, the other cloud moved the flag. The sixth ancestor said, "The wind does not move the flag, but it moves the heart and ears." She originally felt that these words were cryptic and difficult to understand. She did not understand what it was saying. Now, there was no explanation, no reasoning. She only needed to look at it. Just one look. In this situation, she completely understood. It was not the wind, it was not the flag, it was the heart. Chapter 137. A youth in a dark green riding outfit dismounted after receiving the flag and landed on the ground. His success was astonishing. The owner of the horse ranch wasn't a stingy person. He handed the purple jade whip to Xiao Ju and praised, "Young master has great skills. In recent years, you are the fastest person to receive a flag." Cui Yuji couldn't help but clap. "Huanqing, before you arrived, I heard that your adoptive father had found a martial arts master for you. Now, it seems that martial arts master has put in a lot of effort into teaching you. Even in Jiang City, it's rare to see someone with such skill." Xiao Ju nodded with a smile. Uncle is too kind. He thought that Cui Yuji still didn't know that Xiao Ju was still holding back. If he were to really fight openly, it would probably shock everyone and expose his identity. Just as she was thinking, Xiao Ju walked over and threw the purple jade whip into her arms. Hien was overwhelmed by the favor. Thank you. He felt that Xiao Ju was different today. She seemed to be very easy to talk to and had a good heart. However, he couldn't think of a reason, so Hien shook his head. "Now that you have the purple jade whip," Aunt Wei said with a smile. Concubine Wei smiled and said, "Why don't we go take a look at the sacrificial ceremony by the river? It's very lively. You can even get offerings from the water god. After eating the offerings, you'll be bathed in divine water. You'll be blessed throughout the year." Cui Yuji slapped his head. Right. I almost forgot about that. "Huanqing Yin, you two go and pray for a good omen. How can we not attend the water god festival?" What was the water god's sacrificial ceremony? Yin was confused, but he couldn't refuse such hospitality. He followed the crowd towards the canal. When they got close, they saw that there was a large empty space near the canal. There was a round stage set up, and there were many people wearing masks, singing and dancing. It was probably a folk song from Jiang City. The tune was very cheerful, and there were people of all ages. It was very lively. As soon as he came to a stop, he heard a lady's voice, Lord Cui. The few of them looked over and saw Ling Xiao, the young miss of the Hall of Ceremony, who had played the zither for everyone as a guest a few days ago. Ling Xiao. Beside her stood Yin Min who was glaring at them with hostility. Ling Xiao was also dressed up today. She was wearing a pink corset dress and a pair of small boots that Jiang women wore. Her long hair was also tied up with small braids. She looked gentle and playful. She smiled and said, "Min and I just arrived here, and we met Master Cui. It's really too much of a coincidence." "What a coincidence." Cui Yueji also smiled. "Xiao Min where are your parents?" "Father and mother are on the boat. Min and I brought the servants and guards here to take a walk. We wanted to see the sacrificial ceremony and take some offerings back." His gaze fell on Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju was only looking in the direction of the stage and did not even look at him. Ling Xiao's heart sank. Actually, she and Yin Min did not see Xiao Ju here. They had already seen him when they were fighting for the wind at the horse field. The young man was as handsome as the moon and was stunning beyond compare. The way he held the flag and smiled was immediately imprinted in people's hearts. It was hard to forget even if one wanted to. However, such a man was in the limelight in front of everyone just to win a whip for that woman. Ling Xiao was extremely jealous. She was born with good looks, talent, and knowledge. She was also of noble birth. There were many talented young men in Jiang City who admired her, but she looked down on none of them. However, one day, such a person came and surpassed everyone in the city. It was a pity that he was a married man, and he was so good to his wife. who looked ordinary and mediocre. If at first, Ling Xiao was only angry at Xiao Ju for ignoring her, after a few times, she even hated He Yin. If there was no one Yu Yin, if she had met Xiao Huanqing first, this would not have happened. What was so good about that woman? Xiao Huanqing must have been blinded by lard to mistake a fisheye for a pearl. He Yin was looking at the people dancing and singing on the stage with great interest. He asked Concubine Wei, "Why are they all wearing masks?" A mask represents a person's identity. These are all legends related to the water god. Dancing and singing during the ceremony is actually to convey the legend of the water god. Concubine Wei smiled and said, "If Miss Yu Yin likes, you can also dance with us on the stage and play one of the roles." When the ceremony is about to end, the elders will use a willow branch to dip the water of fortune and sprinkle it on everyone. After bathing in the water of fortune, there will be joy in the extreme. Ian had never heard of such folklore. He said, "It's quite interesting." Ling Xiao went forward and smiled. "Does Madame Xiao also want to go on stage?" Ian waved his hand. "I'm just saying, and I also want to go on stage and dance. If Madame is willing, it will be very lively." She stared at He Yin with a gentle and considerate smile. But for some reason, He Yin instinctively resisted. She was actually not very proficient in the relationship between women and could even be considered careless. But she could still distinguish between ordinary hostility and friendliness. Why did Ling Xiao have an unconcealable hostility towards her? He Yin thought about it and could not think of any way to offend this lady. "Both of you are about the same age." Cui Yuezhi smiled and said, "Yu Yin should go up together. Our Jiang's water god ceremony is very simple and not difficult. If there is anything you don't understand, Xiao and Min can teach you." Cui Yuezhi had already said it. If He Yin continued to refuse, it would seem like he did not respect Jiang's folklore. He said, "All right then, but I don't know how to dance. Don't laugh at me." "I won't," Ling Xiao said sweetly. "We will teach you." Then, she pulled Yin Min towards the stage. "Let's go get the masks first." He Yin braced herself and sighed. Forget it. Even if Ling Xiao and Yin Min were hostile to her, they didn't know martial arts, so they wouldn't do anything to her. It was nothing more than some harmless little jokes. It was not a big deal for her to be clever. As she was thinking, she heard someone beside her say, "Why didn't you refuse?" He Yin was surprised and turned to look. Xiao Ju's gaze fell on her face. She could not tell what kind of expression he had. He said mockingly, "You obviously don't like it. Why didn't you refuse?" "I don't think that's a good idea." He Yin hesitated. "If I refuse, Master Cui might not be happy." He laughed as if he did not agree with He Yan's way of doing things. He said, "If you don't like it, just refuse. You have the ability to refuse, Lady He." He reminded her, "You can't make everyone happy." That was true, but it seemed to have become a habit for her to try her best to make everyone happy and achieve perfection. On the other hand, Yin Min pulled Ling Xiao aside and whispered, "What do you mean by this? Who wants to dance with her? I can't wait to annoy her. I'm not going." "Wait." Ling Xiao grabbed her. "Let me finish. What are you talking about? I've heard about what happened at the Xiaolua workshop." Yin Min's face immediately turned red when she heard this. She choked for a moment and said, "How did you know? Who doesn't know about this now? The news has already spread." Ling Xiao looked at her with a smile. "Don't be angry. Of course, I'm on your side. Besides, I don't like when Yu Yin. If that's the case, how can I let her have it easy? What do you want to do?" Yin Min said angrily. "Isn't this a dance? I don't want her to be in the limelight. I want her to make a fool of herself." Ling Xiao smiled and pointed to the masks at the side. "Let her suffer. The girls of Jiang are not so easy to bully. I've never seen Madame dance." Lin Shuanghe waved his fan and said meaningfully, "I'm really looking forward to having such an opportunity to broaden my horizons today." He Yin thought to himself, "She doesn't know how to dance. At most, she can dance with a sword. However, she's a foreigner. Even if she dances at the ceremony, others will only treat her too harshly. I just hope that she doesn't make a big mistake. I'm just here for the fun." While he was thinking, Ling Xiao and Yin Min came over. Yin Min was holding a few masks in her hands, while Ling Xiu was holding a wooden box. When she walked in front of He Yin, Ling Xiu looked troubled and said, "I just want to ask Seely. Many people came to the ceremony today, and there are only a few masks left. I don't know how to distribute them. Why don't we draw lots to decide? Aren't they just masks?" He Yin didn't care too much and asked, "What's the difference?" Different masks represent different characters. In the legend of Jiang's water god, there are also some villains and clowns. Ling Xiu paused and smiled. However, the possibility of Madame picking the clown character is not high. It shouldn't be. He Yin nodded and said modestly, "You guys pick first." "Madam, you're not from Jiang. You should pick first," Ling Xiu said with a smile. There was no point in rejecting this kind of thing. He Yin said, "Okay." As he spoke, he reached into the wooden box that Ling Xiu was holding and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She opened the paper and saw the words Li Lai written on it. "Li Lai? What does it mean?" she asked hesitantly. Chui Yu was stunned. Concubine Wei was also a little surprised. However, Ling Xiu covered her mouth and exclaimed, "It's actually Li Lai. Madam, today it's really unfortunate." "Is that bad?" Ian was puzzled. "Just as I said, in the legend of Jiang's water god, there are many villains and clowns. Li Lai is one of them. This is a liar who is full of lies. He committed all kinds of evil by the water of the mortal world and cheated many people of their wealth. He didn't even let the elderly and children go. He did the most shameless things in the world. The deities in the heavens couldn't stand it anymore and sent a subordinate of the water god, a fairy, to subdue him. This liar can be full of lies in front of others, but in front of the deities, he can only speak the truth in his heart. He said all 10 of his secrets, and in the end, he was locked in the underwater prison by the deities. He can't go ashore for the rest of his life." He Yin listened and unconsciously put himself in the shoes of the deities. When he heard that he can't go ashore for the rest of his life, he couldn't help but say, "How tragic." "It's quite tragic." Yin Min put on a fake smile and said, "However, since you have already drawn the lot, you can only act as Li Lai. If you have already decided to participate in the water god ritual and go back on your words halfway, you will be punished by the water god." Ian really wanted to ask how the water god would punish her. However, on second thought, didn't she die in the water in her previous life? She didn't know if it was a coincidence. She said, "So be it. In this world, someone has to act as a clown, right?" Chui Yueji was still a little hesitant. "But Yu Yin, that mask, what's wrong with the mask?" Ling Xiu took the mask from Yin Min and handed it to He Yin. "This is Li Lai's mask." He Yin saw the mask and understood why Chui Yueji had such an expression just now. Li Li's mask looked like a leopard cat, and it was an extremely ugly leopard cat. It was drawn with a fierce look, but in the middle of the eyes and nose, there was a large white area painted. It looked both treacherous and ugly. Girls would definitely not want to wear such a thing on their face. Moreover, this mask was very heavy. When she wore it on her head, it would make her head bigger for no reason. He Yin weighed it in his hand. "It's all right." She had never cared much about things like appearance. Concubine Wei's expression was not very good. After interacting with He Yin for the past few days, she only felt that He Yin's temperament was gentle and cheerful. Others might not understand, but she grew up in the inner residence. Jealousy between girls was something she could understand at a glance. This was clearly Ling Xiu deliberately making things difficult for He Yin. Thinking about it, to act as a clown in front of her sweetheart and perform all kinds of funny and ridiculous actions, not to mention what others would think. Just the girl herself would feel ashamed and unable to show her face. Which girl in this world didn't want to be as beautiful as she sure Diao-chan in the eyes of her lover? Concubine Wei said, "How can you let Miss Yin act as a clown? Can't you tell Seely?" "It's fine." He Yin smiled. "When it comes to the sacrificial ceremony, it will work if one is sincere. There is no need to fuss over the details." Chui Yuji did not sense that the atmosphere was not right. Hearing He Yin's words, he smiled and said, "Good. Yu Yin is really straightforward." On the other side, Lin Shuanghe and Xiao Ju frowned at the same time. Lin Shuanghe covered his face with a fan and said to Xiao Ju in a low voice, the blue beauty culprit. It was you who caused the trouble and caused my sister he to suffer. Xiao Ju's expression was slightly cold. She glanced at him and was silent for a moment. Suddenly, she said, "You just said that Li Li's secret is to be told to the immortal." Ling Xiu saw that Xiao Ju took the initiative to talk to her and was delighted. She smiled and said yes. After a while, Madam will be on the stage and will have to tell the immortal's 10 secrets. Ling Xiu paused, then smiled and continued, "And these 10 secrets must all be true. Legend has it that Li, who is full of lies, is bound by the immortal's magic and can only tell the truth. When the time comes, Madam will also have to tell the full 10 secrets." He Yin was speechless. He suspected that this immortal was actually a lunatic who liked to pry into other people's secrets. Immortals also have roles to play. Xiao Ju's gaze lightly swept past Ling Xiu. "In that case, I will do it." W. Ling Xiu was stunned. He Yin was also stunned. "You don't understand?" The man's gaze was as sharp as lightning. Although his tone was calm, his expression was cold. "I want to act as the listener." He Yin almost choked on his own saliva. Xiao Ju's words meant that she wanted to dance with him on the stage. Was Xiao Ju crazy, or was the world crazy? He Yin could not understand. No one in Shuo City would believe that second young Master Xiao would do such a thing. Qi Wu and Fei Nu also could not believe their eyes. They suspected that there was something wrong with their ears and that they had misheard. Ling Xiu did not expect Xiao Ju to take the initiative to bring up this matter. For a moment, she did not know what to do. However, the man's gaze was so cold that she was a little scared. She subconsciously asked, "Why?" "Because," Xiao Ju said with a faint smile, "how can my wife's secret be known by others?" With just one sentence, Ling Xiu, who was still a little scared just now, was so angry that her face turned green. Yin, she almost fainted. She felt that Xiao Ju was not acting like Xiao Ju today. It was strange. Xiao Ju did not care about He Yan's expression. She only asked Ling Xiu, "Which mask is it?" Ling Xiu pointed at the one in Yin Min Er's hand. Yin Min was a little scared of Xiao Ju and immediately handed it over. Yin took a look. This immortal's mask was nothing special. It was just a piece of black iron. Then, a cloud pattern was painted on the forehead. "How do I do it?" he asked. Concubine Wei saw through the trick. She smiled and said, "Actually, there are not so many rules when dancing on the altar. If you are a local, you will naturally understand. However, if you are a foreigner, as long as you are sincere and pray for the water god, no matter how you dance, it is just a formality. The water god is very forgiving. She will not be calculative over small matters." Xiao Ju said, "Understood." He glanced at Yin. Seeing that Yin was still holding the mask, he held her wrist and said, "Come here." After taking 2 steps towards the altar, Yin looked back. He saw that Ling Xiu and Yin Min were looking at him with hostility. She asked, "What's wrong with you? Commander-in-Chief, are you crazy?" "You are the one who is crazy," Xiao Ju said unhappily. "Why did you agree to her?" "Didn't I say? Since we are already here, I am afraid that Master Chui will be unhappy. Moreover, we are just wearing a mask and dancing. We don't have to use knives and sticks. It is not a big deal to lose a piece of meat." He turned to stare at He Yin and laughed sarcastically. "Why don't I see you being so obedient when you are with me?" He Yin said, "Am I not obedient enough?" Xiao Ju was too difficult to please. "In the future, if you don't want to do this kind of thing, you can refuse." Xiao Ju's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't let others think that you are compromising. It is so ugly." "I am not compromising." "You are." He looked down at He Yin and smiled mockingly. "You like to lie to others. Are you going to lie to yourself too?" He Yin was speechless. She instinctively wanted to refute, but she had a feeling that Xiao Ju was right. However, there were many times when sacrificing one's feelings and preferences had become a habit. There were more and more important things to consider. No one could tell her that she could refuse, be willful, and be unhappy. So, gradually these things disappeared. Xiao Ju saw He Yan's listless expression and paused. She knocked her head and said, "Hurry up and put it on." As she spoke, she picked up the mask in her hand and put it on her face. The mask was made of iron and was very smooth, but it was still very heavy. Xiaoju put the mask on her face with one hand and put the other hand behind her head to pull the trigger. She couldn't get it right for a moment. Seeing this, Yin put the lyre in his hand aside and said, "Let me help you." She walked behind Xiaoju and said to Xiaoju, "Put the mask in the right position. I'll help you from behind." Xiaoju was tall, so she could only stand on her tiptoes to pull the trigger. As she did so, she said, "Have you never worn a mask before? Why can't you do something so simple?" Xiaoju sneered, "Have you worn a lot of masks before?" Yin was stunned and laughed. "Even if I have never eaten pork, I have seen pigs run." After helping Xiaoju put the mask on, she put the lyre on her face as well. One of them was wearing a mask, which made her look more mysterious and noble. The other was comical and cunning. No matter how she looked at them, it was funny. Xiaoju pulled her up to the altar. The chief of ceremonies nodded at them gently and pushed them to the center of the altar. Yin could not understand the people around them who were wearing masks and singing and dancing. Yin asked Xiaoju, "Commander-in-Chief, how do we dance?" Xiaoju replied, "I don't know." Yin learned from the people around her and danced for a while. However, she felt that it was too difficult and gave up. She pulled Xiaoju to a corner of the altar where no one was looking and said, forget it. Let's not dance anymore. Let's do something else." Xiaoju was wearing a mask, and her expression could not be seen clearly. However, it was obvious that her face was full of impatience. "Commander-in-Chief, will the water god blame us for being so perfunctory?" Xiaoju asked, "Are you scared?" "I'd rather believe it than not." This person was very cold, then continued dancing. "I really can't dance anymore." After a while, Yin said, "Commander-in-Chief, just now, Miss Ling said that lying requires one to tell 10 secrets to the immortal. Since we're here, let's act until the end. I'll tell you my 10 secrets. That's it. Maybe the immortal will see that we're so sincere and won't mind that we don't dance." Xiaoju smiled and said lazily, "Okay, go ahead. 10 secrets, and all of them had to be true." This was hard to say. She counted with her fingers and said, "I used to be a good drinker, but now I'm not. I know how to memorize Wu Zi's Art of War. I'm the first in the Liang Province Guards. I really want to join the 9 Flags Battalion. I'm the one who unbuttoned Chung Lisu's clothes. I could sell them for money." This was already 5 secrets. Xiaoju was speechless when she heard this. She only said, "Boring." Yin was encouraged and continued to work hard. "In my heart, Commander-in-Chief is a very good person. I'm very grateful to you." Xiaoju sneered, "I won't let you join the 9 Flags Battalion. Every time Commander-in-Chief misunderstands me, I'm very sad." Xiaoju said, "Continue lying. Commander-in-Chief and I were fated in our previous lives." Xiaoju didn't even bother to look at her. Yin said, "I was a female general in my previous life." This was even more ridiculous. There was only one last secret left. Yin raised his head and looked at the person in front of him. His face was covered by a mask, and he stared straight at her. Only his beautiful jawline was exposed. His lips were thin and beautiful, and they were curved lazily, showing the heartlessness and gentleness of a young man. Her own face was also covered by a mask. Hidden in the dark, it was as if she was in the middle of the night, and it gave her a sense of security. One last secret. Yin tiptoed and leaned closer to his chin. She said softly, "I like the moon. The moon doesn't know." Chapter 138. The water god ritual would take more than an hour to finish. When Yin and Xiaoju came down, it was already late. Ling Xiao and Yin Min were nowhere to be found. Concubine Wei said, "You two must be hungry after walking around for the whole day without eating." Yin rubbed his stomach. "It's okay. Then let's go eat first." Cui Yuezhi said, "There are several good restaurants in Jiang. Which one do you want to go to?" "I want to." Yin pointed at the boat with a black awning on the river. "Eat there." She had already seen many people riding small boats. There was a stove at the bow of the boat. She did not know what was simmering inside, but she guessed that it was some kind of soup. The rest of the food and wine would be bought by the hawkers on the shore or the river with money. People could sit on the boat and eat while looking at the bustling scenery on both sides of the river. It was very special. She had never been to Jiang before. She felt that it was new and wanted to try it. "That's a firefly boat." Concubine Wei smiled and explained, "The boatman will sail the boat to the falling firefly spring in the evening. The weather in Jiang is warm, so there are no fireflies in the summer. They land in the forest beside the firefly spring. When they sail the boat over at night, they can see the river in the dense forest. There are fireflies everywhere. It's very beautiful. I was lucky enough to go there with Master one year. Now that I think about it, it's very beautiful." When Yin heard this, he wanted to go even more. He looked at Cui Yuezhi and said, "Uncle, why don't we go on this firefly boat? Girls like these." Cui Yuezhi smiled and waved his hand. "I won't go. This firefly boat is only prepared for couples or lovers. 2 people can ride on one boat. There are so many of us, so we can't ride on the same boat." Yan's words were stuck in his throat. He thought that Jiang's Water God Festival was actually the Qixi Festival of the Central Plains. It was too unfriendly for people who did not have a lover. Did people who did not have a lover not have the right to see the legendary falling firefly spring? How preposterous. Since Miss Yin wishes to go, then go with young Master Huanqing. Concubine Wei smiled and said, "There are many other boats around. Tonight, there should be a stage on the water. It will be very lively." Yin was struggling. She really wanted to go and experience it, but Xiao Ju might not be willing. She turned to look at Xiao Ju and asked tentatively, "Young Master? Don't even think about it." "Young Master, I really want to go." Xiao Ju pursed her lips. "I think you're really pushing your luck. I've never seen a swarm of fireflies before," Yin said in a low voice. "Since we're already here, don't you want to take a look? Don't treat me as a woman. Just treat me as a subordinate. We're just passing by and enjoying the local customs." "Young Master, husband?" Yin called out to him again. Xiao Ju's mouth twitched. "Speak properly. If you don't agree, then this concubine will continue to speak like this." Concubine Wei covered her mouth and laughed. She seemed to be unable to watch the 2 children quarrel. She whispered a few words to Cui Yuezhi. Cui Yuezhi nodded. Concubine Wei ordered someone to go to the riverside and find a boat. She said to Yin and Xiao Ju, "Master has already paid the money. Tonight, the boat's master will take you to the Jiang River. If you see anything delicious or fun, just buy it. When the time is up, he will also take you to the falling firefly spring." She paused and said, "I originally wanted you to bring a few bodyguards with you. However, the falling firefly spring is patrolled by the city's garrison. There shouldn't be any problems. But if you're worried, you can." "Thank you, Concubine Wei. There's no need for bodyguards," Yin said happily. Suddenly, he thought of something and asked Xiao Ju, "What if Lin Shuanghe and Qi will want to see it too?" Xiao Ju turned around and saw that Qi Wu and the others had already taken a few steps back. They shook their heads at him, indicating that they didn't want to see it. That's right. Rough men probably didn't like things like fireflies. Even if they liked them, they wouldn't dare to show it here. "Then let's go up first." Yin was very happy. He got on the boat with the black awning first. This boat wasn't as beautiful as the boats on the Chunlai River in Shuo City. From the outside, it could even be said to be plain. However, the inside of the boat was quite spacious. There was a floor and a small stove for cooking. If one sat here, ate something, enjoyed the river breeze, and looked at the lights of the night market on both sides of the river, it would be a wonderful thing. He bent over and sat on the floor to look at the river. The Jiang Canal was very long. It passed through the city. Today was a festival. So many lanterns were lit on both sides of the river. Everyone was shouting and laughing. It was very lively. The boatman was a middle-aged man wearing a bamboo hat. He was very sturdy and his arms were strong. He was rowing with all his might. Yin leaned on the bow of the boat. She was originally a little afraid of water, but now that the surroundings were so lively, and perhaps because Xiao Ju was by her side, she forgot a lot of her previous fears. All that was left was the novelty. Just as she was enjoying the view, a small boat suddenly brushed past her. There was a man and a woman on the boat. The woman suddenly splashed a handful of water at Yin. Hien was caught off guard and splashed water all over her face. She was stunned. The boatman laughed. "Miss, you're not from Jiang, right? You don't know the rules of Jiang. This is the canal. If two boats meet, there will be a water fight. People say that the canal feeds the people of Jiang. It's not water that gets splashed, it's good fortune and luck." The woman looked at her and smiled. Her smile was kind and a little sly. It made it difficult for her to get angry. Hien thought, what kind of rule is this? Aren't they afraid that they won't be able to go out if their clothes get wet? Hien's thought was wrong. Everyone who knew that they were going to have a water fight brought a few sets of clothes with them so that it was convenient for them to change. She was the only one who foolishly wore a set of clothes. Cui Yuezhi had not been on the Firefly boat for a long time, so he had long forgotten about it. That was why he behaved this way. Probably because they saw that Hien was particularly splashy. A few boats came over. Regardless of whether they were men or women, they all bent down and scooped up a handful of water from the canal and threw it at Hien. Hien was confused. She shouted, "Boatman, please move the boat further away." Before she could finish her sentence, a large handful of water was thrown at her face. Hien was shocked. The next moment, someone stood in front of her and pressed her head against his chest to block the incoming water. Xiao Ju looked across and saw that the person who threw water at Hien was a man. He was a man who did not have the slightest sense of pity for the fairer sex. He was giggling foolishly at Hien. The corners of Xiao Ju's lips curled up. In the next moment, the teacups in the boat floated in the water, and a large amount of water splashed, drenching the man from head to toe. The woman next to the man was either his wife or lover. She said anxiously, "How can you do this?" Xiao Ju looked at her with a faint smile and said slowly, "I'm just giving you some good fortune. You don't have to thank me." Hien was speechless. She raised her head from Xiao Ju's chest and said, "Actually, you don't have to be so calculative." She looked around and was silent for a moment. Look at how scared they are. There were a few boats around them. They probably thought that Hien's reaction was very interesting. Now that they saw the man's example, they did not dare to come closer. They quickly asked the boatman to row the boat further away as if they were avoiding the plague. Xiao Ju laughed. "You still have the mood to care about others?" Hien looked down at herself. Half of her body was drenched. Xiao Ju stood up and walked to the back of the boat. She took a handkerchief and threw it to her. Then, she sat by the small stove where the tea was boiling. "Come here." Hien obeyed. Xiao Ju said, "Dry your hair." Hien obediently agreed. She placed her long hair on the stove and used the heat to dry her hair. "Commander-in-Chief, are you hungry?" "You're hungry?" Hien touched her stomach. "Very." She had always had an amazing appetite. Xiao Ju sighed. She went to the front and said something to the boatman. Not long after, the boatman rowed the boat and arrived at a water market. Although it was called a water market, it was actually a few dozen boats together. There were people selling snacks, hot tea, all kinds of snacks, and even roasted chicken and roasted goose. The smell was very delicious. The boat stopped at the water market. Xiao Ju asked Hien to come to the bow of the boat. "Choose what you want." The food on the boat was very different from the food in Shuajing. Hien was greedy for some, but he could not bear to part with the others. He picked a little of everything. Therefore, he carried a big pile of oiled paper bags. Xiao Ju was silent for a moment. Then, she asked, "Are you a rice bucket? If I can't finish it, I can bring it back to Lin Shuanghe and the others." Hien smiled and said, "I've already restrained myself." Xiao Ju was silent for a moment. She also picked a few things and paid. Then, she helped her carry the oiled paper bags onto the boat. Hien was very happy with the food and drinks. She sat on the ground and looked out of the boat. She happily opened the paper bags to eat and drink. She had a good appetite. After being hungry for a day, she did not care about her image. Xiao Ju endured and said, "Pay attention to your manners." Hien did not care. He still did what he wanted. After reminding her twice, Xiao Ju gave up. She placed her hands on the small window of the boat. She suddenly remembered that when she was young, she also took a boat to Jinling with her classmates from the Xianchang school. At that time, there was also Xiao Ju. It was her first time on a boat. She was very seasick. She vomited a few times on the boat. She almost died on the boat. Now, she did not get seasick. But in the past, the young people all went their separate ways. In the end, it was still Xiao Ju who stayed by her side. The world was unpredictable. There seems to be a water stage over there. Yin was surprised and said, "Boatman, can you move the boat over there?" The boatman said, "Okay." He rowed the boat to the side of the water stage. The bottom of the stage was propped up by something. There were only some wooden stakes above the water. Then, the stage was built on top of the wooden stakes. The surrounding spectators could only sit on the boat and look up. They saw that the performers had painted faces and were singing enthusiastically. The dance of the martial artists was very beautiful. Although they could not understand the words, it was very lively. There was also a boat selling delicious honey water. Yin ran to the bow of the boat to look. There were many girls buying it. Seeing that Yin was engrossed in watching, the vendor smiled and explained, "Miss, these are all fresh. Do you want to have a bite after watching the show? We have everything here. Lychee cream, bayberry juice, apricot juice, plum blossom wine, sugarcane juice, wet pear juice, sweet bean soup." Yin saw that in the small cup there was a snow-white cold and red ball on top. He asked, "What is that?" "This is sugar ice cold seed. It's sweet and cold. You definitely won't lose out if you have a bite. Miss, do you want a cup?" Yin was a little greedy. Just as he was about to say something, Xiao Ju asked, "Is this cold?" "It is cold." The vendor replied enthusiastically, "The ice hasn't melted yet. It's very cool." "I don't want this. Change it to something hot," he said. Yin stared blankly for a moment, but the peddler said enthusiastically, "Then is it sweet bean soup? I just cooked it. It's very warm in your hands." "Oh, did you get wet just now?" The vendor smiled as he scooped a spoonful of sweet bean soup from the small bucket into a bowl and handed it to Yin. He said, "Then you should drink more to warm your body. Young master is so considerate." Yin was confused. At this moment, he didn't care about what the vendor said. He only asked Xiao Ju, "Don't you want to drink some?" "I don't drink sweet things." He turned and walked into the boat. Yin asked the vendor, "What's not sweet?" "Perilla juice isn't sweet." Yin took out a few copper coins from his sleeve. "I want another cup of perilla juice." She held the sweet bean soup in one hand and the perilla juice in the other. She followed Xiao Ju into the boat and handed the perilla juice to Xiao Ju. "This isn't sweet. I've already asked. Drink it. It's my treat." Xiao Ju was speechless. "I gave you the money. It's the thought that counts. How can you be so calculative?" Yin scooped a spoonful of sweet bean soup for herself. It was sweet and warm. She squinted her eyes. "It's really delicious." Xiao Ju said, "You're so easy to feed." "You don't know." Yin said, "I rarely ate sweet things in the past. But actually I like sweet things very much." She said, "Jiang is so nice. I want to be a Jiang person too." "You can stay here." "How can I do that?" Yin sighed. "There are many other things I need to do." While they were talking, a small boat came from the side. Someone exclaimed in admiration. Yin climbed over to take a look. He saw a craftsman sitting at the bow of the boat. He was kneading dough figures. He was kneading whatever the performers were singing on the stage. The pile of straw was already filled with dough figures. They looked exactly like the young actors in the opera. Their craftsmanship was outstanding. Yin leaned on the bow of the boat and watched the dough change rapidly in the hands of the craftsman. The old man who was kneading the dough figure smiled and asked, "If you like, can you buy one? I can knead a dough figure just like you." "Really?" "Of course." Yin was a little tempted, but she hesitated. "Forget it." Xiao Ju was boiling something on the small stove. When she heard this, she looked up and asked, "Why not?" Yin turned around and whispered, "I'm a woman now. I can buy it, but if I go back to the city guard station, I have to dress up as a man. It's not convenient to bring this dough figure with me. It'll be bad if it's used as evidence. Since I'm going to lose it anyway, why should I have it?" Xiao Ju stared straight at her. Suddenly, his lips curled into a smile as he lightly said, "You're not tall, but you're quite scheming." He tapped his finger, and a string of copper coins flew onto the craftsman's table. "Make one for her." The old man smiled and kept the copper coins. "Okay." Yin hurriedly turned around and walked to Xiao Ju. "Why did you buy it?" "If I buy it, I can't take it with me when I leave Jiang. Why waste money? You don't like it. He smiled and said, if you like it, then buy it. In this world, it's too boring if you don't fight for it, because you're afraid of losing it. Seeing that Yin still did not move, he looked at her mockingly, but his tone was very calm. Lady He, we're in Jiang. You can do whatever you want today. You don't have to worry about it. You are exactly how you were before this. You can tell me what you like or hate. You don't have to wrong yourself, and you don't have to lie to everyone. Yin was speechless. She did not know what to say. After a long while, she said, can I really do whatever I want? Xiao Ju shrugged. You can do whatever you want. Yin sat down. The old man who made the dough figure was very skilled. After a short while, he finished making the dough figure. He called out to Yin from the other side. Lady, your dough figure is ready. Yin thanked him and took the dough figure from him. The dough figure was made very carefully. Even the lace at the corner of the skirt was exactly the same as the one on her body. It looked very beautiful. She was in a daze. After a long while, she raised the dough figure and asked Xiao Ju, Commander-in-Chief, do you think she looks like me? Xiao Ju replied coldly, she's much better than you. Yin was used to being mocked by him. She was not angry. She only said happily, I really do look like a girl. She saw Xiao Ju taking something out of the jar on top of the stove and putting it in a bowl. Yin went over to take a look. She did not know when Xiao Ju had cooked a bowl of noodle soup. The noodles were white and there was a little soy sauce. There were no onions. There was only an egg in the noodle soup and some green vegetables. The aroma of the noodle soup assailed her nose. Yin was stunned. She had been busy looking at the scenery outside and eating. She did not know when Xiao Ju had cooked a bowl of noodle soup. She asked, Commander-in-Chief, are you hungry? Xiao Ju did not say anything. She only pushed the bowl in front of her and handed her a pair of chopsticks. Eat. For me? Yin took the chopsticks. She was flattered. Why? I bought a lot of food. I'm not. Before she could say the word hungry, she heard the man in front of her say lightly, isn't today your birthday? Yin was stunned. After a while, she asked, how do you know? Even in front of Cui Yuezhi, she said a few days after the spring equinox. Lady He, Xiao Ju said slowly, do you know that your ability to deceive people is erratic and sometimes full of loopholes? Yin did not say anything. After a while, she said softly, so, the reason why you are so good to me today is actually because you know that today is my birthday, right? Good? Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. You seem to have a lot of misunderstandings about good. Am I good to you? It's not like that. Yin thought to herself. Other than Lu Buong, she had never met anyone else who was as good to her as Xiao Ju. No one remembered her birthday. In the past, they called her He Rufei. That was He Rufei's birthday, not hers. But today, this bowl of birthday noodles was made by Xiao Ju for Yin. She raised her head and smiled at Xiao Ju. Commander-in-Chief, you are so good to me. Thank you. The corners of the girl's eyes were curved. She was obviously smiling, but her eyes were a little red because of the steam. Xiao Ju was slightly stunned. Just as she was about to say something, Yin had already buried her head in eating noodles. So he did not say anything. The sky was completely dark. The sky was as black as ink, sprinkling down thousands of stars. The river formed a river of stars, pressing down on the boat. The boatmen paddled slowly. Unknowingly, they had already left the most prosperous middle section of the river. There were fewer boats around, and a cool breeze blew. It was pleasing to the eye. A dark green streamer swept across the water and stopped at the bow of the boat. The boatmen had already stopped paddling. The boat floated quietly on the water. Yin pulled Xiao Ju out to take a look. Beside the spring, in the depths of the dense forest, countless bright and dim streamers floated around the water and the forest. It was like a glowing drizzle. Thousands of flying streamers reflected in their eyes. It's so beautiful. Yin sighed. In the past few years, it was not that she had not seen beautiful scenery. It was just that she did not have the mood to appreciate it when she was on the road in the army. Thinking about it, it had been many years since she let go of everything like this. She would never forget such a night for the rest of her life. Yin turned his head and saw Xiao Ju lying down at the bow of the boat. Her hands were behind her head as she looked at the fireflies in front of her. She thought for a moment and also laid down beside Xiao Ju. She imitated Xiao Ju and put her hands behind her head. She looked at the light that could not be extinguished by the night wind. It was as if the stars were right beside her. "Today is the happiest birthday I have ever had. Thank you, Commander-in-Chief," she said. Xiao Ju did not comment. She said, "Don't we all have to make a wish on our birthday? Go ahead and finish what you started." "Make a wish?" Ian said, "I don't have any wishes." Praying for blessings from the heavens was probably an act of self-deception. If you want something, you have to fight for it yourself. Why are you so indifferent? If I really have to say something, I hope that there is someone in this world who came for me. It wasn't for Rufei or General Feihong. It was just for her. It was for her. What kind of wish is that? Xiao Ju sneered. I thought you were going to say that you want to be promoted to a noble rank. At the very least, you want to enter the 9 Flags Battalion. Spots of light in the forest shone brightly in the night sky. Perhaps it was because the night wind was too good and the scenery was too wonderful that she wanted to say more. She said, "Commander-in-Chief, have you noticed that ever since I got together with you, I have always been someone else's stand-in? Sometimes it's Chung Li Su, sometimes it's Wen Yuyan. Next time, I don't know what my identity will be." Xiao Ju said, "Do you feel wronged?" "Not really. It's just that." She looked into the distance. Sometimes, after being someone's stand-in for so long, it's hard to avoid forgetting who you are. "Commander-in-Chief, you have to remember my name. My name is Hien." The girl looked at the sky and smiled. Xiao Ju looked at her and saw that her eyes were clear and bright. Amidst the happiness, there seemed to be a layer of dark sadness. The brightness of the past was gone. It was as if there were countless, unspeakable sufferings that were finally swallowed down one by one. He turned and looked at the sky. In the wilderness, the stars were like a waterfall. A cool breeze blew past their cheeks. The water surface was dark and unpredictable. It was unknown how many people would have their sweet dreams tonight. How many people would have seen the glimmer in the night sky? The young man curled his lips and said slowly, "Such a terrible name. I will remember it after hearing it once. Don't worry that I will forget, Lady Hien." Chapter 139. The boat floated on the water, and the fireflies gradually hid in the depths of the forest. The young girl leaned on the young man's shoulder and unknowingly fell asleep. The boatman stood up from the bow and was about to speak when Xiao Ju shook her head slightly. The boatman understood and did not wake her up. He did not paddle and let the boat float. Xiao Ju just sat there and looked at the water. The water was calm, and occasionally the wind swept past, creating layers of ripples. He turned his head and looked at the young girl sleeping on his shoulder. She was not like ordinary girls who like to be beautiful. She slept without caring about her image. There were traces of tears on her lips, and she even drooled. He turned his head away in disgust and looked at the water in the distance. Not long after, he lowered his head and smiled helplessly. In the end, he did not push her away. Hien rarely had a good night's sleep and vaguely had a beautiful dream. But as for what the dream was, he forgot when he woke up. When he opened his eyes, he found himself lying on the soft bed on the boat, covered with a thin layer of mattress. She sat up and saw Xiao Ju sitting at the bow. She called out, "Young master." He looked back at Hien and said, "Wash up, it's time to go back." Hien was surprised for a moment, and then he found out that they had stayed at the Falling Firefly Spring for an entire night. The surrounding fireflies had all left, and only their boat was left. Hien yawned and used the clean water on the boat to wash up. When he combed his hair, because Cui Jiao and Hong Xiao were not around, he randomly tied his hair into a man's bun. She washed up and came out of the bow and heard the boatman talking to Xiao Ju. "Young master, go directly to the spring. Walk a few steps forward and there is a relay station. You can hire a carriage at the relay station. Young master and miss can take the carriage back. The canal does not allow fireflies to pass during the day." Xiao Ju paid the money to him and walked to the shore. She said to Hien, "Let's go." Hien also thanked the boatman and quickly went to the shore. It was early in the morning, and the wide leaves of the grass and trees were covered with sparkling dew, bringing with it some cold morning dew. He Yin yawned again and asked Xiao Ju, Commander-in-Chief, did I fall asleep last night? Why didn't you wake me up? Why did you stay here all night? Xiao Ju sneered. I wonder who was the one who snored so loudly last night that no one could wake her up. Are you serious? He Yin was suspicious. Are you lying to me? I'm not you. As the two of them chatted, they didn't get far before they saw a relay station, just as the boatman had said. There was also a noodle shop next to the relay station. The lady boss was cooking noodles in a big iron pot, and the aroma assailed his nostrils. He Yin didn't eat much in the morning, so he was already hungry. He said, let's eat something first before taking the carriage. Without waiting for Xiao Ju to reply, he waved to the lady boss and said, 2 bowls of noodles and a tray of steamed buns. She had a good appetite, so she pulled Xiao Ju to a table outside the straw hut and sat down. The steamed buns that had just come out of the oven were steaming hot. He held them in his hands and blew on them to cool them down. Xiao Ju wasn't as impatient as her. After the noodles were served, she ate very slowly. Seeing He Yan's mouth full of oil, she only felt that it was funny. Don't look at me and laugh, He Yan said. It's as if I'm embarrassing. This person replied, neither quickly nor slowly. It's embarrassing. Look around. How many people eat as ugly as you? He Yan looked around sneakily. It was still too early, and those who came to eat were probably people who were rushing on their way, or people who were resting here on their way. Sitting beside her was a pair of grandmother and granddaughter. The old woman had white hair and a kind face. The little girl beside her was about 11 or 12 years old. She wore a dirty cloak, and half of her face was buried in it. She lowered her head and ate silently. Both of them were dressed very plainly, probably because they were rushing here and didn't have time to tidy themselves up. Seeing He Yin look over, the old woman was startled. She smiled and asked, Miss? It's nothing. He Yin smiled. Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. Even the little brat eats more elegantly than you. What she said was true. The little girl's clothes were dirty, but the way she ate was very decent and elegant. She didn't look like an ordinary person. He Yin asked himself, even when he was Rufei and Mrs. Su, he couldn't have done better than her. No wonder Xiao Ju laughed at him. However, were the people in Jiang all crouching tigers and hidden dragons? Looking at the old woman, he didn't feel that way. She turned her head and smiled at the old woman. Annie, is this your granddaughter? She's so pretty. Yes. The old woman was surprised at first, but then she smiled. He Yin looked at the little girl again. The little girl didn't react to her and only lowered her head to eat. The old woman explained, Nini is shy with strangers. Miss, please don't mind her. He Yin smiled. Why would I mind? She's just too cute. Are you going to the city? No. The old woman said, there's a funeral at home. We're bringing Nini back to attend the funeral. He Yin nodded and said, my condolences. Then he turned around and ate. As he ate, he felt that something was wrong. He couldn't figure it out, but he felt that he had overlooked something. He looked at Xiao Ju again. She had stopped eating and was looking at the grandmother and granddaughter beside He Yin. She seemed to be deep in thought. He Yin leaned closer to him and whispered, Commander-in-Chief, why do I feel that something is wrong? Xiao Ju glanced at him and suddenly stood up. Then she walked to the grandmother and granddaughter. He Yin's question just now had already made the old woman unhappy. She hurriedly finished eating and was about to leave with the little girl. However, as soon as she stood up, she was blocked by someone. A handsome young man stood in front of her. His posture was straight and his expression was calm. He looked at the little girl under the cloak and said calmly, Speak, little brat. The old woman pulled the little girl into her arms and said protectively, Young master, what do you want? I didn't know that the kidnappers of Jiang were so bold. Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. They dare to kidnap people in broad daylight. Kidnappers? He Yin was stunned. Yes, she felt that something was wrong. It was because there seemed to be a barrier between the little girl and the old woman. They did not look like a grandmother and granddaughter at all. From the beginning to the end, the old woman did not ask anything when the little girl was eating. If they were really an ordinary pair of grandmother and granddaughter, As a grandmother, she would probably ask her granddaughter if it was hot and if it was to her liking. No matter how cold and unsociable a girl was, as an elder, she should be more tolerant and not leave her to fend for herself. She looked kind, but her actions were not kind at all. She did not seem like a grandmother. Instead, she seemed like a kidnapper who was eager to deceive others. You? What nonsense are you talking about? The old woman stared at Xiao Ju and said, "This is my granddaughter. Don't make false accusations. Whether she is your granddaughter or not, we will know once we ask." Xiao Ju said, "Speak, little brat." The little girl did not move. You. The old woman was about to take the little girl away. In the next moment, the whip in He Yan's hand moved and rolled towards the other party's cloak. In an instant, the cloak was lifted up by the whip and fell to the ground, revealing half of the little girl's face. He Yan weighed the purple jade whip in his hand. This was the whip that Xiao Ju had won for him. Fortunately, he always had it with him. It was quite useful. The little girl under the cloak had a clean and beautiful face. Her eyes were full of tears, and her mouth was silent. Her acupoint was sealed. "You don't seem to treat your granddaughter very well." Xiao Ju sneered slightly. The old woman saw that the situation was not good and shouted, "Mind your own business." A sharp and high-pitched whistle came from her mouth. In the surrounding post stations, there were people feeding the horses, eating breakfast, washing their faces, and resting. Suddenly, a few people pulled out their swords and stabbed towards He Yan and Xiao Ju. "Assassins," He Yan said. He could not hide his surprise. There were so many people, they could not be considered kidnappers. Kidnappers were afraid of being discovered, so they had to keep a low profile. If they were discovered, their first reaction would be to run away. This old woman not only did not run away, but also had so many accomplices. It was obvious that she had nothing to fear. She looked at the little girl whose acupoint was sealed, or who was drugged. What was the background of this little girl? Why did they need to use such a formation? When Xiao Ju came out, she did not have a sword. Seeing that the group of people were close to her, she used the teacup on the table as a hidden weapon and knocked down the swords that were coming towards her face. He Yan threw the whip in his hand to her. "Use this." He picked up an iron rod from the ground. The lady boss of the noodle station was already scared and hid under the table. For a moment, the sound of metal clashing could be heard. When He Yan fought with them, he knew that this group of people were not ordinary kidnappers. Otherwise, how could they be so skillful and ruthless? It was obvious that they wanted to silence them. The little girl was still standing in the same place. When the old woman saw that He Yan and Xiao Ju were being surrounded by other people, she rolled her eyes and directly grabbed the little girl. She jumped onto a horse at the entrance of the post station. She was so agile that she did not look like an old person. With a wave of the whip, the horse galloped straight ahead. "Not good," He Yan said. "She wants to run away." He turned his head to look at Xiao Ju and saw that Xiao Ju was surrounded in the center of the group of people. He Yan was a man and was very skillful. For a moment, everyone ignored him. He Yan said, "Young master, you delay them. I will chase after her." What the relay station did not lack the least was horses. He Yan also flipped onto a horse and chased in the direction that the old woman had fled. The road out of the city was the main road, but the old woman did not take the main road. Instead, she chose a bumpy path. He Yan chased after her and thought to himself. The fight just now was very intense, but the little girl did not move at all. It seemed that she was either drugged or had her acupuncture point sealed. Even if they had to delay Xiao Ju, they still wanted to take the little girl away. It seemed that the little girl was very important to this group of people. Her horse riding skills were superb, so even if the old woman took advantage of the loophole, she couldn't get rid of He Yan, who had been following her the whole way. She became anxious and scolded. "Stinky girl, don't court death. Put her down, and I can still spare your life." He Yan was not afraid. "But you don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit." The old woman snorted and used her whip to whip the horse. He Yan saw this and stepped on the horse's back. He slapped the horses, but hard. The horse jumped forward and almost caught up with the old woman's horse. He Yan's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He used the whip in his hand to wrap around the old woman's horse's head. The distance between the two horses was very close. The horse was frightened and kicked its hooves. He then took the opportunity to jump off the horse and snatch the little girl from the old woman's hands. The two of them rolled on the ground together. As soon as they landed, Hien realized that the little girl was really drugged. She could only make very slight movements. No wonder when they were in the noodle house, no matter how they talked, she did not respond. Hien only had time to unseal her mute acupoint. Before he could ask what the little girl's name was and where she came from, the old woman sneered. She pulled out a soft sword from her waist and coldly said, "Meddling in other people's business." She thrust her sword towards Hien. Hien pushed the little girl away and faced the attack himself. She was barehanded. She had lost her iron rod in the chaos. She could only rely on her nimble body to avoid the opponent's sword. "Who are you people?" Hien asked while dodging. He was secretly shocked by the old woman's skills. "Why did you take this little girl?" The old woman put on a fake smile and waved her sword towards him. "So much nonsense. Go to hell and ask the king of hell." Hien raised his eyebrows. "You want me to go to hell with this little skill? You are too arrogant." She suddenly turned over from the ground and ducked to avoid the sword above her head. She moved her feet and was already behind the old woman. She punched the old woman's back and took the sword from her hand. "Damn it," the old woman angrily said. Since the sword was already in her hand, although it was not as good as Qing Lang, it was still barely usable. At this moment, there was no one else around. Hien was best at swordsmanship other than arranging troops. In just a moment, he forced the old woman to retreat. It seemed that she was about to lose. Hien said, "If you surrender now, you still have a chance to live." "Eyesore," the old woman shouted. Suddenly, she pulled out a silver hairpin from her hairbun. The silver hairpin had some unknown mechanism. It immediately grew 3 inches. It was a dagger. She did not use the dagger to deal with Hien. Instead, she faced Hien's sword and threw the dagger accurately towards the girl on the ground. The girl was already drugged and could not move. She could only watch as the dagger was about to pierce her chest. Hien wanted to withdraw his sword to save her, but it was too late. Bang! A loud sound was heard. Just a little bit more, and the dagger would have pierced the girl's heart. Something hit the dagger, and the handle was deflected. In an instant, the dagger lost its ferocious strength and slowly rolled to the side. Hien's sword pierced the old woman's chest at the same time. The old woman widened her eyes, as if she could not believe that someone could deflect her dagger. She spat out a mouthful of turbid blood and breathed her last. Someone walked out from the depths of the forest. It was a thin man about 40 years old, but he was very elegant and outstanding. He was dressed in white, and his long hair was tied up with white silk. He looked like a swordsman, but also like a zither player. His eyebrows were bright, and his long beard did not look sloppy. Instead, it added to the elegance of a Jianghu person. When Hien saw this person, he was stunned. The man in white walked closer and helped the trembling girl up from the ground. Then, he looked at Hien. Hien muttered, "Master." He did not look surprised, but he was a little surprised. "Eh?" Chapter 140. Hien stayed where he was. For a moment, he didn't know what to be shocked about. Should he be shocked that he met Lu Buwang here, or that Lu Buwang could recognize him at a glance? Lu Buwang unsealed the little girl's acupoints. The little girl coughed a few times, looked at them, and didn't speak. Hien couldn't help but ask Lu Buwang, "Master, how did you recognize me?" Lu Buwang was the only one who had seen Hien's face under the mask, except for a few people from the He family. In the Battle of Mo County back then, all her comrades had died in battle. If Lu Buwang hadn't picked her up from the pile of corpses, Hien wouldn't know where she was now. Lu Buwang knew her identity as a woman and had seen her face before. But now, her face was no longer the young Mistress Su of the past. He smiled and said, "Your swordsmanship is special, and it's mixed with my swordsmanship. I can see it at a glance. Why? Did you change your appearance?" Hien couldn't explain it clearly in a short time, so he just said vaguely, "It's a long story. We'll talk about it later. But Master, why are you here?" There are suspicious people in Jiang City. I suspect it's Yudo, so I tracked them all the way here. He looked at the old woman's corpse on the ground. I heard the sound of fighting here, so I came to take a look. What happened? Do you know this little girl? Ian shook his head. No, I didn't. My friend and I passed by here, and we're eating in a noodle house. We saw this woman and the little girl acting suspiciously. We thought they were kidnappers, but we didn't expect that there were assassins around. We suspected they weren't simple criminals. While they were talking, the sound of horse hooves came from behind them. They looked back and saw Xiao Ju galloping over. She stopped the horse a little closer to them, got off the horse, walked to He-Yan's side, and asked with a frown, "Who are you?" "We're on the same side." He-Yan hurriedly explained, "This is my master." "Master?" Xiao Ju said in disbelief. "What master? My skills are already the best among the Liang province guards. Didn't I tell you that I have a master to guide me? This is my master. We haven't seen each other for many years. I'm also surprised to see you here today. If it wasn't for her help just now, this little girl would have died." Lu Buang looked at Xiao Ju and smiled. "I'm Lu Buang." "You are Xiao Huanqing," he said. "Young master, where are those people just now?" Ian asked. Since he couldn't win, he ran away. Xiao Ju didn't comment. "What about you? Why are you here to catch up?" "It's not too late to talk about these things later." Ian changed the topic. "These people made such a big fuss just to kidnap a little girl. Isn't it strange? Little girl, what's your name? Where do you live? Whose child are you?" She bent down to look at the child. The little girl was born very well. Although she was still young, it could be seen that she was a beauty. She seemed to be a little frightened as she stared vigilantly at the crowd. She pursed her lips and did not speak. Ian asked her a few times, but she didn't answer. In the end, she just turned her face away. Could he really be a mute? Ian was puzzled. "You're the mute," the little girl replied angrily. "So you can talk. Then why didn't you answer the question I asked you just now?" She asked. The little girl ignored him again. Maybe she just encountered some bad guys and doesn't trust others. "It's okay. She'll be fine after some time," Lu Buang said with a smile. Yin sighed. For a moment, he was helpless, so he looked at Xiao Ju. "Young master, why don't we take this child back first and let Lord Shui decide? If she's really a girl from a big family, Lord Shui will definitely know her." Xiao Ju nodded. When the little girl heard the words Lord Shui, her eyes moved slightly, but in the next moment, she lowered her head again to hide the strange look in her eyes. Lu Buang smiled. "In that case, let's part ways here." Yin was stunned. Lu Buang was always like this. Since Yin knew him, he felt that this person seemed to have no worries and everything went his way. She had never seen Lu Buang befriend anyone, nor did she see him have any contact with others. He never seemed to feel lonely, and he didn't feel too sad every time they parted. When Yin said goodbye to him back then, he was still reluctant, but Lu Buang was very open-minded. He only said, "All good things must come to an end. You have to grow up." They had just met an old friend, but before they could catch up, they had to part ways. Yan's heart ached, and she grabbed Lu Buang's sleeve. "Master, I'm living in a friend's house now. His house is very big. Why don't you go back with us? I have a lot of things to ask you." Xiao Ju's gaze fell on her fingers that were grabbing Lu Buang's sleeve, and she raised her eyebrows silently. Lu Buang smiled and said helplessly, "Why are you still like a child? I haven't seen you for a long time. I thought I would never see you again." Yin refused to let go. "Besides, didn't you just say Yudo? Since it's related to Yudo, we must tell Princess Mengji in Jiang City. Come back with me. I know an official who grew up with Princess Mengji, and they have a very good relationship. It's easier to report this matter." Lu Buang was slightly stunned. "Princess Mengji?" Yin saw that his attitude was different, so she nodded repeatedly. "Yes, master, think about it. It's unusual for Yudo to suddenly appear in Jiang. It has always been difficult to travel through Jiang. Not to mention Yudo. Even people from the central plains of Dawei have to go through many twists and turns to come here. But Yudo can hide in Jiang City. What does this mean? In short, there are many suspicious points in this matter. We should go together." Lu Buang was still a little hesitant. Xiao Ju crossed her arms and looked at the two of them. She smiled lazily and said, "Yes, Mr. Lu, why don't you come back with us and discuss it carefully with your good disciples?" After a long silence, Lu Buang said with a smile, "Okay, then I'll go back with you. I just hope that I won't cause trouble for you." He Yin breathed a sigh of relief. Although he kept Lu Buang by his side, he couldn't do anything. But when he met his teacher from his previous life, he really didn't want to part ways without saying a few words. After all, there weren't many people who could remember He Yin. "Then let's go back to the post station first and hire a carriage to go back to the Chui mansion," He Yin said to Xiao Ju, and then sighed again. "I didn't go back last night. I don't know if I made Lord Chui and the others anxious." Lu Buang glanced at Xiao Ju and He Yin as if he was deep in thought. The little girl, save from the old woman, had been fed medicine. Her body was soft, and she couldn't even walk. Every step she took, she would fall down. He Yin thought for a while and squatted down in front of her, saying, "Little girl, come up." Xiao Ju asked, "What are you doing?" "She can't walk, so I'll carry her to the post station." He Yin answered, "Otherwise, this won't work." She really didn't know that her period had come. Xiao Ju was silent for a moment and said, "I'll carry her." "Huh?" He Yin was stunned. The little girl was dissatisfied and criticized. "I'm a woman, and you're a man. How can you carry me? I want her to carry me." "Little brat," Xiao Ju said indifferently, "if you say one more word, I'll leave you here." The rude and unreasonable little brat was inferior to the unreasonable commander-in-chief, so he didn't dare to say anything more. He was afraid that Xiao Ju would leave him alone. He Yin watched as Xiao Ju carried the little girl and walked all the way back to the post station. When they arrived at the post station, they were no longer in the mood to continue eating breakfast. They only hired a carriage and asked the coachman to go back to the Chui mansion. Sitting in the carriage swayed forward. He Yin and Xiao Ju sat on one side, while the little girl and Lu Buang sat on the other side. They were all silent. Xiao Ju suddenly said, "Mr. Lu, is He Yan's master?" Lu Buang smiled and said, "Yes." "Then Mr. Lu's skills must be very outstanding." "He doesn't deserve the word outstanding." Xiao Ju smiled softly. "Why did you think of accepting He Yin as your disciple? After all, this person," he paused and said with a slightly mocking tone, "except for being short and stupid, he doesn't seem to have any other talent." At this time, He Yin didn't care if Xiao Ju said that he was short and stupid. He was afraid that Lu Buang would let it slip, so he spoke first and said, "Nonsense. Who said that? When I was in Shuo capital, I just happened to travel. Who knew that I happened to meet my master who accepted me as his disciple? It was fate. Among thousands of people, my master saw that I was talented and smart at a glance. He knew that I would be successful in the future, so he accepted me as his disciple and taught me martial arts. It's just that my master is like a wild crane. He has long been out of the world. After teaching me for 3 years, he went to travel around the world. This is the first time I met him after we parted." She consciously explained the ins and outs of all this clearly. She only hoped that Xiao Ju wouldn't ask further. Xiao Ju looked at Lu Buang and asked, "Is that so?" Lu Buang glanced at He Yin and said, "Yes." "I see." The young man nodded and didn't say anything else. The stone in He Yan's heart fell to the ground. At this moment, she heard Lu Buang looking at her and asking doubtfully, "Ahi, what is your relationship with young Master Chiao?" Oh, this question was very difficult to answer. Now she was Wen Yuyin, and Xiao Ju was Xiao Huanqing. In terms of relationship, they were naturally husband and wife. But Lu Buang knew her true identity. Now, there was a little girl with an unknown identity. If this little girl knew Chui Yuezhi, she couldn't let it slip. Then she looked at Xiao Ju, who was leaning against the carriage seat and looking at her with a faint smile, waiting to hear her answer. "Young Master Chiao is my husband." He Yin had no choice but to bite the bullet and spit out a sentence with difficulty. Lu Buang was a little surprised. I haven't seen you for a few years. You're already married?" Yes. He Yin forced a smile. "That's good." Lu Buang nodded slightly. "With someone accompanying you, I can rest assured." He-Yin, after lying so many times, He-Yin understood for the first time what it meant to shoot oneself in the foot with Shur-Tu. It was right now. When they returned to the Chui mansion, only a few concubines were there. Concubine Wei was relieved when she saw them return safely. She stroked her chest and said, "Last night, young Master Huanqing sent a message saying that he would return this morning. The kitchen made breakfast, but I didn't see him. I was a little worried that something had happened. Now I can finally rest assured." Her gaze fell on the little girl and Lu Buwang behind her, and she asked doubtfully, "These two they're my old friends. I didn't expect them to come to Jiang." Ian smiled and said, "Where's Uncle?" "Lord went to the prince's mansion early in the morning. Her Highness the Princess summoned him. I don't know when he will return." Yin and Xiao Ju looked at each other. Cui Yuezhi was not there, so they had to settle the little girl down first. "Have Miss Yin and young Master Huanqing eaten breakfast? I'll ask the kitchen to heat it up again." "My husband and I have already eaten," Yin said with a smile, "but this little sister and sir haven't eaten yet. Please send it to my room when it's ready. In addition, get some hot water. The little sister wants to take a bath and dress up." Concubine Wei quickly agreed. Yin took the little girl back to his room and handed her to Cui Jiao and Hong Xiao, instructing them to bathe the little girl. As soon as he finished instructing, Lin Shuanghe's voice came from the other end. "It's been a night, and you haven't returned. You're finally back. How is it? Are the fireflies beautiful? I should have gone with you last night. Thinking about it, I feel a little regretful that I didn't see such a beautiful scenery. It's really a pity." As soon as he stepped into the inner room, he saw Lu Buwang standing in the room. He was stunned and asked doubtfully, "He's my master," Yin said. "His surname is Lu, and his name is Buwang." "Hello, Master Lu." Lin Shuanghe hurriedly cupped his fists and bowed. Then he asked curiously, "Why is Master Lu here? Could it be that you told this, sir, in advance before coming to Jiang?" Her words were so hurtful that those who didn't know would think that she was colluding with outsiders. Yin hurriedly said, No, absolutely not." "Young master, you've misunderstood," Lu Buwang said with a smile. "I'm originally from Jiang. I met my disciple in the Central Plains before. We haven't seen each other for many years. I didn't expect to meet you when my disciple came to Jiang this time." "I see." Lin Shuanghe also smiled. "Sir, you're obviously not an ordinary person to be able to teach such an outstanding disciple." Lu Buwang smiled, but didn't say anything. He inexplicably felt a little embarrassed, so he said, "Young master, Brother Lin, can you go to the next room first? I haven't seen my master for many years, and I have a lot to say." "Let's listen together," Lin Shuanghe said with a smile. "I also want to know what sister he was like in the past." Xiao Ju glanced at him and walked out by herself, saying, "Let's go. Don't you want to listen?" Lin Shuanghe was still a little unwilling. "If you want to listen to it yourself." Seeing that Xiao Ju had already gone out, Lin Shuanghe could only put away his fan regretfully and said to Yin, "Sister, I'll go out first. You and Master Lu can catch up." After saying that, he also went out and closed the door. Only Yin and Lu Buwang were left in the room. Yin hurriedly stepped forward and helped to remove the guqin from Lu Buwang's back. She put it on the table and moved a chair over, saying, "Master, sit down first." Then she poured a cup of tea for Lu Buwang. Lu Buwang just smiled and watched her do all this. In the end, he sat down at the table and stopped Yin from doing anything, saying, "Enough, Ahi, sit down." The familiar Ahi almost made Yan's eyes turn red. She also sat down at the table and said, "Master." In an instant, she felt like she had returned to the days when she and Lu Buwang lived deep in the mountains many years ago. In the Battle of Mo County, Yin was buried in a pile of corpses. The desert was extremely dry, and she was going to die. Who knew that it would rain at night, and she managed to survive that night. The next day, a passerby passed by and saw the corpses all over the ground. He dug a long pit and buried the corpses of the soldiers who died in the battle one by one. He also found Yin, who was hiding in the pile of corpses and was on the verge of death. The passerby took Yin back and healed Yin. When Yin woke up, she found that the mask on her face was gone. She got up from the bed and found that she was living in a thatched hut. When she walked out of the hut, she saw someone sweeping the yard. It was a middle-aged man with an extraordinary temperament. He was dressed in white and had a white belt. He was thin, and his clothes fluttered in the wind, as if he was an otherworldly man. Ian was a little vigilant and asked, "Who are you?" The man in white stopped what he was doing and turned around to see her. He smiled and didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, "Girl, since you were a girl, why did you join the army?" Ian was shocked and suddenly realized that her identity had been exposed. Later, she learned that the man in white who saved her was called Lu Buwang. He was a lay practitioner who wandered around. Every once in a while, he would go to a place. Now he lived on a barren mountain near Mo County and earned money from the medicinal herbs he grew. Ian asked him at that time, "When you saved me, didn't you encounter any Western Chong people on the way?" There were scattered soldiers of Western Chong wandering around Mo County. If someone was found to have saved the soldiers of Dawei, this person would definitely suffer. Lu Buwang pointed to the sword at his waist. "I have a sword. I'm not afraid." At first, she thought that Lu Buwang was talking nonsense. Later, when she saw a Western Chong man die under Lu Buwang's sword, she realized that Lu Buwang was telling the truth. Lu Buwang was a real, otherworldly master. Ian had never seen such an omnipotent person. He used swords, sabers, whips, spears, and halberds. He also knew Chiman Duanjia and divination. In her stupid previous life, she finally did a smart thing, which was to ask Lu Buwang to be her teacher. Lu Buwang refused. But Lu Buwang didn't expect Yin to be such a persistent person. Whenever she was free, except for eating, she spent most of her time begging Lu Buwang to accept her as his disciple. Perhaps Lu Buwang had never met such a shameless person. In the end, he had no choice but to ask her, "What's the use of learning these things if you become my disciple? If I learn these things when I enter the military camp again, if I encounter Western Chong people like before, I won't be completely wiped out. Even if there is one more person, I can protect him, just like how you protect me. You still want to enter the military camp?" Lu Buwang was slightly surprised. Ian was puzzled. "Of course. Do you know that you are a woman, and your identity is special? Now that your team has been wiped out, you can take this opportunity to go home, and no one will find out your identity. The original He Rufei is already dead." Ian was silent for a while, and then she raised her head. "I never thought of being a deserter." This sentence probably moved Lu Buwang. Later, Lu Buwang drank Ian's tea and began to teach her step by step. But Ian was a girl after all, and some things were not suitable for her. So Lu Buwang tried his best to teach her something suitable. But even if she only learned a little from Lu Buwang, it was enough for Yin to gain a lot. What Lu Buwang taught Yin the most was Chiman Duanjia. The combination of Chiman Duanjia and the art of war was enough to create a female general who could use troops like a god and set up formations exquisitely. So what if there were brave generals with extraordinary strength? So what if the Western Chong people were extremely strong, ferocious, and valiant? War was never just about strength. I didn't expect that Master could still recognize me at a glance, even though I'm not in my original appearance. Yin lowered her head and smiled. "How did you recognize me?" "Your swordsmanship," Lu Buwang laughed, "is unique in the world." When Yin first took Lu Buwang as her master, she wanted to show Lu Buwang her original skills. After Lu Buwang saw it, he was silent for a long time. He probably thought that as a woman, since she had the confidence to enter the military camp, she must have extraordinary skills. But after seeing Yin's swords, bows, and horses, Lu Buwang began to doubt whether his decision was wrong. He really didn't know where Yin's confidence came from, but he had already drunk the tea, and he had to finish teaching the disciple he accepted. Lu Buwang was also very helpless. He had never accepted a disciple before, but when he did, he accepted the one with the worst aptitude. It was really a blessing from the heavens. Fortunately, Yin was not completely without merit. This girl was not good at anything except swordsmanship. Her foundation was so good that it was a little surprising. Lu Buwang asked Yin at that time, "Who taught you swordsmanship? It's not bad." Hearing this, Yin said proudly, "There's an expert helping me in secret." I don't know who he is, but I guess he's a teacher from our school. He thinks that my aptitude is good, so he taught me after class. What she said was true. When Hien entered school as a teenager, her martial arts were a mess. Even though she practiced swordsmanship in the courtyard every night, she still didn't make much progress. When she was about to give up, one day, she suddenly found a piece of paper on the table in her room. There was a small figure drawn on the paper, which was the weakness and mistakes of her swordsmanship when she practiced swordsmanship after class. It also wrote how to overcome these problems, and the instructions were very detailed. Hien tried to practice for a few days, and she really made some progress. She was very surprised. Then she found that there would be such a piece of paper on the table in her room every 10 days. It adjusted and guided her as she made progress. She didn't know who the person was, but she guessed that it should be a kind teacher in the school. His swordsmanship was better than hers, and he could see her shortcomings at a glance, so he gave her pointers. But Hien didn't know who the teacher was. She once tried to hide in the room and wait for the person to deliver the letter, so that she could catch him red-handed. But the person didn't show up that day, so Hien knew that the expert didn't want to show up. But in the end, he was curious and grateful. Therefore, he wrote a note and placed it on the table before returning to the residence. The note said, "In 3 days, I will return to the school. See you in the bamboo forest in the backyard at the Z hour. Thank the benefactor in person. Please be sure to come." And then, Lu Buwang asked, "Do you know who the person is?" Hien was silent for a moment and shook her head gently. As soon as she returned home, she had a big quarrel with He Yuansheng and his brother and was punished to kneel in the ancestral hall. Less than 3 days later, she left home at night and joined the army alone, taking a completely different path. I missed the appointment. She didn't see that person. Chapter 141. The room was silent for a moment, and Lu Buwang's voice interrupted He Yan's recollection. "What about you?" he asked. He, how did you become like this now? Did you disguise yourself? Young Master Qiao shouldn't be your husband. It was a long story. Hien lowered his head and smiled, saying, "Master, I'm not He Rufei anymore. I'm He Yan. That person is my superior. We came to Jiang to find someone, so we pretended to be husband and wife. As for disguising myself, I didn't disguise myself. I look like this now. I can't come back to my original appearance." Lu Buwang thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "I see. He was always like this." He had a sense of propriety when it came to other people's affairs. If other people didn't want to talk about it, he wouldn't deliberately inquire about it. In some people's eyes, this would seem a little cold, but for Hien, not asking about it was already the greatest blessing. After a while, Cui Jiao knocked on the door and walked out, still holding the little girl's hand. This little girl seemed to have worn off the effects of a drug and was able to walk with more strength. Her face had been washed clean, and she looked like she was only a little over 10 years old. She was beautiful and quick-witted, and her eyes were as moving as black jade, slim and elegant. Cui Jiao combed her hair with long braids, which were the favorite style of Jiang girls. Her hair was braided to the front and hung down to her chest. There was also a circle of small bells. Her clothes were Red Riding clothes, which she asked the housekeeper of the Cui residence for. When she walked over, the jingling sounds were delicate and cute, and she looked more valiant and heroic than ordinary girls. Lu Buwang looked at her and was slightly absent-minded. Hien asked with a smile, "Have you eaten?" Cui Jiao looked embarrassed. "Madam, the little miss refuses to eat." Hien asked, "Why don't you eat? Aren't you hungry?" The little girl turned her head to the side and ignored her words. She was quite arrogant. Maybe because she ate something wrong before, she doesn't want to trust others anymore. Lu Buwang chuckled and looked at the little girl. "Little girl, since we have saved you from the thieves, we won't hurt you anymore. Otherwise, we wouldn't have brought you back to the residence. You can rest assured. If you don't believe me, we can eat together. This way, you won't have to go hungry, and you won't have to worry about any problems." Lu Buwang's gentleness always carried a faint alienation. In addition, his manner was natural and elegant, so it was easy for people to have a good impression of him, and this little girl was no exception. She stared into his eyes for a while, then said, "All right, In the end, his attitude softened. He heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly asked Cui Jiao to prepare some food that children like to eat. Cui Jiao retreated as she was told. Lu Buwang said with a smile, "What's your name?" Xiaolu. In front of Lu Buwang, the little girl was less arrogant and more well-behaved. "Good name," Lu Buwang said with a smile. "Which family are you from? How did you get kidnapped?" At this point, Xiao Lu shut his mouth and refused to say anything more. He Yin and Lu Buwang looked at each other. This child was quite defensive. They didn't know what he had encountered before. While they were thinking, Xiao Lu's gaze fell on the long zither on the table. She looked at it for a while and asked Lu Buwang, "Is this your zither?" "Good taste," he thought. "She can tell at a glance that this kind of romantic thing doesn't suit me." "Yes." "Can you play the zither?" Lu Buwang answered, "Yes." "Play a song for me," Xiao Lu said. How can this child be so good at ordering people around? Ian didn't comment. Although Lu Buwang carried a zither with him, he rarely played it. When He Yin was his disciple, he also asked him to play. But Lu Buwang refused every time. But this time, Lu Buwang's answer was beyond He Yan's expectations. He just looked at Xiao Lu gently and smiled. "Okay," He Yin said. "Master?" Whose master was he? "What do you want to hear?" He even asked Xiao Lu gently. Xiao Lu played with the braid in front of her chest and shook her head. "I don't know. You can play whatever you like best." He lowered his head and seriously asked Xiao Lu for her opinion. "Is slow time okay?" "I haven't heard of it." Xiao Lu nodded. "Play it." He Yin was speechless. Lu Buwang was more obedient to Xiao Lu than to his disciple. If it weren't for the age difference, He Yin would almost suspect that Xiao Lu was Lu Buwang's long-lost daughter. The little girl sat on the high platform with her feet up and down. Lu Buwang put the zither on the table and sat down in front of the table. He wiped his hands and plucked the strings. He Yin actually rarely heard Lu Buwang play the zither. Occasionally, when he got up in the middle of the night to go to the outhouse, he heard the faint sound of the zither. He thought he had bumped into a ghost and was so scared that he trembled. Later, he plucked up his courage and went to take a look, only to find that it was Lu Buwang. When she was young, she didn't understand why Lu Buwang wanted to play the zither in the courtyard in the middle of the night. She only felt that the sound of the zither was indescribably sad. Later, after experiencing many things and gradually growing up, she gradually understood that her master was also a person with a story. In Lu Buwang's past life, there might have been such a person who engraved a deep stroke in his experience, so that he could only miss her through the sound of the zither at night. Now that they hadn't seen each other for many years, the sadness and loss in his sound of the zither were even deeper. Willows in the West City softened in spring. Moving the sorrow of separation, it's hard to stop the tears. Still remembering the affection, it was once tied to the boat. What happened on the green field and the red bridge that day? The people disappeared, the water flowed empty. Youth doesn't flow for young people. Hatred lasts for a long time. When will it stop? When the catkins fall. As soon as I climb the stairs, the spring river is full of tears, endless and sorrowful. Xiao Lu was young, so he didn't know that the sound of the zither was sad. He only felt that the sound of the zither was pleasant and romantic. However, He Yin felt that Lu Buwang seemed to be bidding farewell to something in the sound of the zither. Something was about to leave his life, mixed with reluctance and loss, and would never come back. Lin Xuanhe and Xiao Ju had entered the room at some point. Lin Xuanhe walked to He Yin's side and whispered, "Sister, your master plays the zither really well. It's as good as Huijin. It's just a little too sad." Even Lin Xuanhe could hear it. He Yin sighed slightly. However, even though she had been Lu Buwang's master for many years, He Yin also felt that she had never really entered Lu Buwang's heart. She didn't know what kind of person Lu Buwang was and what he had done in the past, and Lu Buwang didn't mention anything about it. He was like a person who had abandoned the past, but he wasn't serious about the future. He was so casual that he seemed to be able to leave at any time without leaving any traces. After the song, Slow Time, was played, the sound lingered in the room. Xiao Lu looked at him and suddenly clapped. She smiled and said, "I once heard my grandmother play this song. but she didn't play it as well as you. You played it much better. What's your name? Lu Buwang patted her head and said, You can call me Layman Yunlin. That's too long. Xiao Lu wasn't satisfied with his answer. Isn't your surname Lu? Lin Shuanghe agreed with Xiao Lu's words and said, It's really good. Even in Shuajing, it can be ranked among the top. It's just, he looked at He Yin and asked in confusion, Sister He, I don't want to criticize you, but your master's zither skills are unparalleled, and your husband is extremely elegant. How can you play the zither like this? Didn't your master teach you how to play the zither? He Yin said expressionlessly, My master only taught me martial arts. As for my husband, Xiao Ju stood beside her and raised her eyebrows slightly, waiting for her to continue. He Yin cleared her throat and said, You can just play it for me. Why do I have to learn this? Lin Shuanghe. After a while, he nodded and said, It's really an irrefutable reason. Chui Jiao served the dishes. He Yin had already eaten with Xiao Ju, so only Lu Buwang and Xiao Lu were eating together. Xiao Lu didn't seem to like eating with others. She showed discomfort several times. She probably let Lu Buwang eat with her, because she didn't want to worry that there was no poison in the food. Lu Buwang also understood the little girl's thoughts. He only took a little bit of each dish with his chopsticks and stopped eating. Xiao Lu was very picky with her food, but she still ate some rice. He Yin breathed a sigh of relief and said to Xiao Ju, Now we're waiting for Lord Chui to come back. Ask whose child she is and send her back. Speaking of the devil, Zhong Fu's voice came from outside. Lord, young Master Qiao and Miss Yun have already returned and brought back 2 guests. They're now eating in the room. Young Master Qiao seems to have something to ask Lord Chui. Then, Chui Yueji's rough voice came. Got it? The door curtain was lifted and Chui Yueji's voice came from behind the door. Huanqing Yin, you're back? Do you have something urgent to ask me? Her Highness summoned me early this morning. I can't stay in the mansion for long. I have to go out later. His voice stopped abruptly when he saw Xiao Lu's face. He was stunned for a moment, and his voice changed a little. Young Highness, why are you here? Xiao Lu, the little girl who had been arrogant since He Yin brought her back, put down her chopsticks and looked at Chui Yueji. She raised her chin and said proudly, Chui Zhongqi, you're finally here. Young Highness? Everyone in the room was very surprised. Chui Yueji took a step forward and half knelt in front of Xiao Lu. His voice was very anxious. Her Highness summoned me early this morning and said that Young Highness disappeared last night. Her Highness was very worried. Why is Young Highness here? He turned to look at He Yin. Yin, what's going on? He Yin also wanted to know what was going on. She had already guessed that this little girl's identity was not ordinary, but she never thought that she would be Young Highness. Last night, Yin and I fell asleep on the fallen Firefly boat. Early in the morning, we were planning to hire a carriage to return to the mansion. On the way, we encountered Young Highness being kidnapped and saved Young Highness from the hands of criminals. Xiao Ju answered Chui Yueji on behalf of He Yin. Among the people who kidnapped Young Highness, one of them is dead and the others escaped. When Yu Yin and I rescued Young Highness, we didn't know who they were. Hearing this, Chui Yueji was shocked and asked Xiao Lu, Young Highness was kidnapped? Does Young Highness know who they are? Xiao Lu didn't seem to want to mention this matter and said impatiently, How would I know? As soon as I left the mansion, I met them near the canal. I didn't think they were bad people, but who knew? Speaking of this, he said angrily, They have evil intentions and deserve to be killed. Chui Yueji asked Xiao Lu again, Young Highness, are you hurt? No. Xiao Lu muttered, looked at Lu Buwang, and pointed at him. I was almost killed by someone, but this person, this lay Buddhist Yunlin saved me. Only then did Chui Yueji see that there was a stranger in the room. Seeing that Lu Buwang had an extraordinary bearing, he bowed deeply and said, Thank you for saving me. May I know your name? This is my Master Wu, Xiao Ju said lightly. He taught me martial arts back then. We haven't seen each other for many years and didn't expect to meet each other in Jiang. Uncle can call him Yunlin. It turns out to be Mr. Yunlin. Chui Yu was stunned, and he had a better impression of Lu Buwang. He said, I'm going to the mansion to send His Little Highness back. Mr. Yunlin might as well go with me. If Her Highness knows that Mr. saved His Little Highness's life, she will definitely thank Mr. Lu Buwang smiled slightly and said to Cui Yuezhi, Yunlin has long been an outsider. Yunlin appreciates your kindness. As for the reward, forget it. When I saved Young Highness, I didn't know that Xiao Lu was Young Highness. This kind of capable person probably had a bit of a proud and aloof temperament, which Cui Yuezhi could understand. Besides, he was Xiao Huanqing's master. There would be plenty of opportunities to befriend him in the future, so there was no hurry. The most important thing now was to send Mu Xiaolu back to the mansion. Mu Hongjin was about to go crazy. Cui Yuezhi said to Lu Buwang, in this case, I won't force you. Lu Buwang smiled and nodded. Young Highness, do you still want to eat? Cui Yuezhi looked at Mu Xiaolu. If you're done, follow me back to the mansion. Young Highness will be very happy to see you safe and sound. Mu Xiaolu jumped down from the stool and said, got it. Prepare a soft sedan. With that, she was about to go out with Cui Yuezhi. When she passed by Lu Buwang, she stopped and asked unwillingly, you really don't want to go back with me? Will my grandmother reward you with a lot of gold? You can have whatever you want. Lu Buwang bent down and gently rubbed her hair. It's fine as long as Young Highness is safe. Cui Yuezhi was a little surprised. Mu Xiaolu had been spoiled by Mu Hongjin since she was a child. She was very picky about others, but she was very close to Lu Buwang. They were both martial artists, and Cui Yuezhi could feel that Lu Buwang's kung fu was not shallow. If this person could stay in the mansion and accompany Young Highness, he could accompany Young Highness and protect Young Highness. But these things had to be discussed after seeing Mu Hongjin. He turned to look at He Yin and Huanqing. Yin, Huanqing, pack up and immediately follow me to the mansion. You saved Young Highness, so Her Highness must have a lot of questions to ask you. Sooner or later, you will have to go to the mansion. Why don't we do it today? He Yin and Xiao Ju looked at each other. He Yin said, okay, uncle. Cui Yuezhi took Mu Xiaolu out. He Yin said to Lu Buwang, Master, you stay in the mansion first. If there's anything, wait for us to come back. She was afraid that Lu Buwang would leave without saying goodbye after returning to the mansion, so she told Lin Shuanghe, Brother Lin, please take care of my master first. Don't let him act alone. Lu Buwang looked at her and smiled helplessly. Lin Shuanghe immediately understood He Yan's meaning and said, no problem. I guarantee that when you come back, Master Lu will still be like this. Not a single hair is missing. He Yan was relieved. He asked Hong Xiao to comb his hair again, change into clean clothes, and washed up. Then, he followed Xiao Ju out of the Cui mansion. As he walked, he asked Xiao Ju in a low voice, Commander-in-Chief, why did you say that my master is your Master Wu? She also said Layman Yunlin instead of Lu Buwang. Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. Your master seems to be very unwilling to reveal his identity. If he says that he's my master, at least people won't be suspicious. That was true. Tian was thinking about it when he suddenly heard Xiao Ju say, but your master's identity is not simple. He seems to be an old acquaintance of Her Highness. Tian was horrified. How can that be? The way he looked at Mu Xiaolu seemed to be looking at someone else through Mu Xiaolu. If I'm not wrong, he should be Her Highness. Xiao Ju said unhurriedly, as a disciple, how come you don't know anything? He didn't tell me anything. Tian couldn't hide the shock in his heart. Lu Buwang and Mu Hongjin were old acquaintances. This was the most shocking news he had heard today. But He Yin faintly felt that what Xiao Ju said might be true. Lu Buwang's gentleness and doting towards Mu Xiaolu, the sadness in the zither, and his refusal to go to the prince's mansion with Cui Yuezhi seemed to indicate one thing. At least, Lu Buwang was not completely unrelated to the Mu family. But what exactly was their relationship? He didn't get an answer to this question. Cui Yuezhi had already urged them to set off for the prince's mansion. Mu Xiaolu sat in a soft palanquin, while He Yin and the others sat in a carriage. Cui Yuezhi personally escorted them, and the guards were all wearing armor and carrying swords. It was probably because Mu Xiaolu had said that she was kidnapped yesterday, which made people feel that Jiang City was not as peaceful and safe as it seemed on the surface. The prince's mansion was located north of the center of Jiang City, and it occupied a large area. As soon as they arrived at the gate of the mansion, soldiers came up to interrogate them. Cui Yuezhi took them into the prince's mansion. He first took Mu Xiaolu in, then asked He Yin and Xiao Ju to wait in the outer hall. He would call them in later. He Yin and Xiao Ju sat in the outer hall. Feeling bored, He Yin asked Xiao Ju, "Governor, do you know Princess Mingji?" "I don't know much about her." Xiao Ju lazily said, "I only know that King Mingji had a son and a daughter. His eldest son died before he was 18 years old. At that time, King Mingji's position was not very stable. If his position was not stable, he needed to unite forces to consolidate it. His Majesty was benevolent, but there were always confidants who did not like the vassal king's power. They wanted to eliminate all the vassal kings into Wei. In the end, Princess Mengji married the son of an important official in the imperial court. Her husband was a member of the imperial court, so he could monitor Jiang City at any time to see if there was any rebellion. It was also because of this that King Mingji was able to keep his position as a vassal king. However, the son of the official, who was Princess Mengji's husband, died of illness not long after Princess Mingji gave birth to a son. Their son also had the same problem as their father. He was born with a congenital deficiency, so their daughter died when she was young. Therefore, there were only Princess Mengji and her granddaughter, Mu Xiaolu, in the current King Mingji's residence. He Yin was not particularly curious about Mu Hongjin, but after hearing Xiao Ju's words, he knew that this person might be an old acquaintance of Lu Buwang. He had some expectations and wanted to know who had appeared in Lu Buwang's past life. Lu Buwang treated Mu Xiaolu so well. If a man treated a little girl well, it was very likely that it was because of this little girl's family, if it wasn't because of his gentle nature. After the two of them sat for a while, a maidservant in gauze clothes with braided hair came forward with a smile and said, "Please come with me. His Highness wants to see you." He Yin and Xiao Ju stood up and followed the maidservant inside. As soon as they entered the residence, they were surprised to find that the interior of the residence was bigger and more spacious than it looked from the outside. It could be said to be magnificent. The color of the residence was mainly red, and the railings and pillars in the residence were carved with myths and legends about the water god. In the backyard of the residence, there was even a bronze statue of a bare-chested goddess riding a kuan and traveling in the sea. The weather in Jiang was hot, unlike the bitter cold in Liangzhou. It was only spring, and when the sun shone in the morning, it was a little hot. Copper basins filled with ice cubes were placed in the four corners of the courtyard, so it didn't feel hot and was cool and pleasant. As for the flowers, plants, and trees, they gave off the same feeling as Jiang City: prosperous, lively, ostentatious, and proud. After passing through the courtyard and the long corridor, the maidservant stopped in front of the King Mingji's residence and said with a smile, "Please come in." He Yin and Xiao Ju stepped in and felt that their eyes suddenly brightened. The main hall was very wide, and there were columns carved with the pattern of the water god in the four corners. Above them, there was a painting of auspicious cloud patterns. The floor was covered with a thin blanket, which was as clear as gauze and decorated with some gold sparkling. For a moment, He Yin felt that the legendary Dragon Palace was probably like this. It had a kind of wild and mysterious beauty to it. There was a main seat in the hall and side seats, but there was no one on them at the moment. The princess wasn't here? While He Yin was puzzled, he heard footsteps coming from behind the hall. Then, someone walked out from the high seat at the back of the hall. It was a very beautiful woman. She was very tall and thin. She was a little old, but she didn't look like a beauty past her prime. She wore a red robe, and the corners of her robe were embroidered with the shape of waves with gold thread. Her black hair was combed into a long braid, and she wore a small golden crown on the top of her head. Her skin was very white, but her eyes were very dark, and there was a hint of red at the corners of her eyes. Her facial features were gorgeous and deep, but her expression was a little cold. Even though there was a slight smile on her lips, it was a smile that was high and mighty. It was as if she was standing on a cliff, and it was a frosty flower that bloomed brilliantly and coldly. One could only look at it from afar and not approach it. It was rare to see a woman with such a threatening aura. She was already very beautiful, but her arrogance made her beauty a burden. Mu Hongjin walked out slowly and sat down on the high seat in the middle. She looked down at He Yin and Xiao Ju. He Yin tugged at the corner of Xiao Ju's clothes, lowered his head, and said respectfully, "Greetings, Your Highness." No one answered for a long time. Just when He Yin thought that Mu Hongjin would continue to remain silent, Mu Hongjin spoke. Her voice was also very cold, gorgeous, and unbridled. It seeped into people's hearts. I don't know why the commander-in-chief of the Right Corps is so free that he didn't hesitate to disguise himself as someone else to come to Jiang. Chapter 142. I didn't know why the commander-in-chief of the Right Army was so free that he didn't hesitate to disguise himself as someone else to come to Jiang. He Yin thought, "Have I been discovered?" Judging from her tone, she didn't seem to have just discovered me. He looked at Xiao Ju again. She wasn't surprised at all. She just smiled lazily and said, "Your Highness, is this how you treat Little Highness's savior? You're denouncing them?" "They're guilty," Mu Hongjin said coldly. "You're not innocent either. You can't have come to Jiang just to see if I'm doing well." "It seems that Your Highness is doing well." Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. "But it's not necessarily the case for the other people in Jiang City." Mu Hongjin sat on the high seat and stared at Xiao Ju for a while. Then she suddenly smiled. With this smile, the cold and unapproachable look just now suddenly melted a lot. She leaned back against the soft cushion and pointed to the guest chair beside her. "Sit down. Don't say that I've neglected a guest from afar." He Yin thanked her and sat down with Xiao Ju on the side seat. This was Princess Mingji Mu Hongjin. He Yin looked at her and felt that she was different from what he had imagined. Before coming to Jiang, He Yan's impression of Princess Mingji was that she was a bit older, kind, dignified, and steady. Later, he guessed that she might be Lu Buwang's old acquaintance, so he thought that she might be a straightforward and righteous person. However, he didn't expect that Mu Hongjin in reality was so beautiful, powerful, domineering, and unrestrained. "Your Highness." He Yin hesitated for a moment before asking, "When did you find out? Do you think that it's so easy to enter Jiang City? Or do you think that I'm just a decoration? You can't even see through this." Mu Hongjin stroked a translucent ruby ring on her finger and said lightly, "I've known since the first day you entered the city. That idiot Chui Yuezhi can't see through it, but it doesn't mean that everyone is as stupid as him. I was waiting to see what you were up to, but since you saved Xiao Lu, I won't beat around the bush with you." She looked at Xiao Ju and said, "Tell me, Military Governor Xiao, why did you come to Jiang City?" "I'm here to find someone. His name is Chai Anshi," Xiao Ju said. "He used to be my father's subordinate. After the Battle of Mingshui, he disappeared. I found his whereabouts. He is in Jiang. However, no one has been found yet. As for the Tsuewei Pavilion, it was burned down half a month ago." The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "Since Your Highness already knows our identities, I would like to ask for Your Highness' help. With Your Highness' help, it shouldn't be difficult to investigate someone in Jiang City." Mu Hongjin's smile faded slightly. "Military Governor, Xiao couldn't have foreseen this day and planned to use my hands to do things for you, right?" Xiao Ju smiled. "How dare you?" He Yin was secretly speechless. They were in Mu Hongjin's territory now, and they didn't have any soldiers with them. Xiao Ju not only didn't tuck her tail between her legs, but also dared to talk back to Mu Hongjin. Even He Yin felt that her attitude of asking for help was too much, let alone Mu Hongjin. The young man said carelessly, "Yudo has infiltrated Jiang City. Your Highness must be very distressed these days. Chayanchi might have clues about Yudo. Your Highness helping me is helping yourself." Mu Hongjin stared at him. "Why should I believe you? You won't lose anything if you believe me." Xiao Ju's voice was calm. "It depends on what Your Highness is most worried about." The hall was silent for a moment, and slowly, the sound of applause could be heard. Mu Hongjin clapped her hands and stared at Xiao Ju. It was hard to tell whether it was fear or admiration. She said, "General Feng Yin really lives up to her reputation." Even if you don't become a general, you can still do a good job as a counselor. Your Highness is overpraising me. Mu Hongjin stood up and said, "You're right. Yudo has infiltrated Jiang City. I've been worried about this for a long time. But how can you prove that the person you're looking for knows about Yudo's clues? Jiang City has always been easy to get out, but difficult to get in. Chaianshi has infiltrated Jiang for many years, and Yudo has entered Jiang as if there's no one there. There must be a connection. In your Highness's mansion, there must be someone among the officials of Jiang who colluded with the Yudo to create loopholes in Jiang City. It must be done by one person. Whether it's Chaianshi or Yudo, they both use the Yudo as an excuse to enter the city." Xiao Ju said calmly, "Your Highness wants to clean up the Yudo, but with your Highness's current ability, it's already difficult." Mu Hongjin smiled. "Oh, why would I be difficult?" Because of Xiao Lu, Mu Hongjin's smile faded. Yin understood the meaning of Xiao Ju's words. After King Mingji's wife passed away, at least she left behind a son who was able to hold the position of king. However, after her son passed away, she was only left with a granddaughter who was still young. Although a woman could inherit the position of king and become a princess, if it was that simple, Mu Hongjin would not have been married off to the son of an important official in the imperial court to stabilize her power. The huge mansion was only supported by two women, a pair of grandmother and granddaughter. Many people were eyeing the mansion covetously. With internal and external troubles, Mu Hongjin would not be as relaxed as she looked. Military Governor Xiao is wise and observant. Mu Hongjin sighed. Ever since my son passed away, the people in Jiang City have been unstable. Xiao Lu is still young, so she can't take on big responsibilities. The aristocratic families have already formed their own factions and have fallen apart. They're like loose sand, so it's easy for others to take advantage of them. However, she paused and looked at Xiao Ju. Yudo has infiltrated Jiang, so I'm afraid that the situation in Dawei's Central Plains will not be stable. Your Highness is wise. So, Mu Hongjin raised her chin slightly. Do you want to work with me? If your Highness is willing. Xiao Ju smiled slightly. I'll be happy to. Mu Hongjin nodded. I'll send people to search for Chaianshi's whereabouts in the city. If he's still alive, I promise you that I'll be able to find him no matter where he hides. However, you have to promise me. Her eyes flashed with a hint of cunning. General Feng Yun is said to be a godly strategist. You and I will work together to solve the Yudo's predicament in Jiang City. This time, she used "I" instead of "This Highness," which meant that she was putting herself on the same level as Xiao Ju in order to seek cooperation. Xiao Ju nodded. Of course, since she had already spoken, Mu Hongjin's face was no longer as cold as before. She even showed a friendly smile. Cui Yuezhi asked you to come all the way to the palace and waited in the outer hall for a long time. I'm sure you haven't eaten yet. Since you're here, you should eat before you leave. Xiao Lu will change his clothes so that he can personally thank you. She looked at Yin again with a hint of interest in her eyes. However, I didn't expect that Military Governor Xiao would choose a married man to come to Jiang. Is this person your lover? Yin almost choked on his own saliva. He knew that the people of Jiang were straightforward, but he was still surprised that the princess was so direct. Xiao Ju glanced at her and said lightly, "No, she's my subordinate." Subordinate? Mu Hongjin smiled and said, "But I heard from Yuezhi that you went to the Water God Festival together yesterday. You even walked across Lover's Bridge for her and rode on the Firefly boat." With Military Governor Zhao's temperament, he wouldn't be so accommodating to a subordinate. As a subordinate, isn't it a little too bold to make such a request? Yin pondered in his heart. She was implying that she should restrain herself in the future. After thinking for a while, she bowed and said respectfully, Yin will listen to your Highness's teachings. He will be careful with his words and actions in the future and will not cause trouble for the governor. Mu Hongjin was stunned for a moment. She looked at Xiao Ju. You really are a subordinate. Xiao Ju was silent for a moment. She said calmly, Your Highness, please don't laugh at my incompetence. It's fine. That's your business. Mu Hongjin stroked her hair and said, I'll go find Cui Yuezhi first and tell him to help you find someone. You two wait here for a moment." After saying that, she stood up from the high seat and slowly disappeared into the back of the hall. Yin waited for her to leave before he breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't know why, but he always felt that he couldn't be too relaxed in front of Princess Mingji. It was probably because her aura was too strong, making it difficult for people to ignore her. "Governor, why did you admit it so quickly just now?" Yin touched Xiao Ju's elbow. "You didn't even try to quibble." Xiao Ju sneered. "Not everyone is a liar like you." Yin shrugged and changed the topic. "But this Princess Mingji is really good. She discovered us the moment we entered the city." "I didn't intend to hide it from him," Xiao Ju said carelessly. "Cui Yuezhi can still be perfunctory. How can a woman who can stabilize Jiang City with her own strength be so easy to fool?" "Yes," Yin agreed with her words. "Women are not easy to fool when they don't act on their emotions. But if they like and trust someone, it would be too easy to be fooled." Xiao Ju glanced at her and said slowly, "But some women are not easy to fool, and they like to deceive people." "Yin," she said, "what you said is meaningless. Who's deceiving you?" As they were talking, a maid from the prince's mansion walked in and said, "Please follow me. His Highness invites you to eat in the banquet hall." Yin and Xiao Ju then walked to the banquet hall. The banquet hall of the prince's mansion was also very big. Although the walls and ceiling were painted with colorful paintings and the floor was covered with bright-colored blankets, because there were very few people at the long tables, it was still a little empty at first. The magnificent emptiness made people feel even more lonely. Mu Hongjin sat on a small couch at the long table and said, "Sit." Yin and Xiao Ju sat down at the table. "I don't know what you like to eat, so make yourselves comfortable." Mu Hongjin seemed to be a little tired and leaned against the soft cushion. "I asked Cui Yuezhi to go back first. It's not convenient for him to talk here." Cui Yuezhi still did not know Xiao Ju and Xiao Ju's identities, so it was indeed inconvenient for him. The food in the prince's mansion was not much different from the food in the Cui mansion. However, Yin was not very particular about food. He was happy as long as there was something to eat. He immediately thanked Mu Hongjin and picked up his chopsticks reservedly. He also remembered that the person in front of him was Princess Mingji, so it was not good for him to be presumptuous. Therefore, he ate more politely. Mu Hongjin looked at Xiao Ju. "Military Governor Xiao, if the Yudo sneaked into Jiang, what is their motive?" "Dowei." That one sentence made Yan's action of drinking the soup stop, and he instantly felt that the delicious food was tasteless. Once the Yudo gains power and attacks Jiang, the first thing they will do is to cut off the water supply of the canal. The cities along the river will be affected by the disaster. There will be no food or money, and the merchants will go on strike. The Central Plains will be in chaos. Then, they will head north, enter the capital, and attack the palace, he said calmly. "There is nothing more natural than this." Mu Hongjin was silent for a moment before she said, "Military Governor, Xiao makes it sound so easy for you to say such a shocking thing. Because it's about to happen." Xiao Ju said, "Not now. Early on, during the battle between Father and the southern barbarians at Mingshui, there were already clues." Southern barbarians? This was the first time Mu Hongjin heard of this. She was puzzled. What does it have to do with the southern barbarians? There is a traitor in the imperial court who colluded with the southern barbarians in the past. Unfortunately, the southern barbarians' rebellion was quelled, and the Yudo kingdom was far away. It has been peaceful all these years, and it has been accumulating power in secret. Therefore, he changed his target of cooperation from the southern barbarians to the Yudo kingdom. Jiang is the first city to be used to claim credit. Mu Hongjin placed her hand on her chest and frowned. Jiang has not fought for many years. "Allow me to ask," Xiao Ju asked, "how many soldiers are there in Jiang now?" "Less than 20,000. Yin frowned when he heard this. Less than 20,000 was not a number that could make one feel at ease. After all, there were more than 20,000 Liang province guards. Doesn't Military Governor Xiao have the Southern Prefecture soldiers under his command? Mu Hongjin asked. Can the Southern Prefecture soldiers be transferred to Jiang? It's too late, Xiaoju said. He Yin and Mu Hongjin were both stunned. Mu Hongjin said coldly, "Is Military Governor Xiao exaggerating to scare us? Your Highness already knows the truth." If it wasn't urgent, Xiaoju's expression was still calm. Your Highness wouldn't have been kidnapped during the Water God Festival. Mu Xiaolu was a part of their plan. However, they coincidentally encountered He Yin and the others, and the plan was disrupted. It could be imagined that if He Yin and the others hadn't appeared that day, and Mu Xiaolu had been successfully kidnapped, there would be two outcomes. The first was that the news of Her Highness' disappearance spread, and the entire Jiang city was in a state of panic. The princess would no longer have an heir, and the people's hearts would be in chaos. The aristocratic families would cause trouble, and the people hiding in the dark would take the opportunity to stir up trouble and directly take the throne. The second was even simpler. They would use Mu Xiaolu as a bargaining chip to negotiate with Mu Hongjin. If Mu Hongjin doted on this granddaughter, she would directly hand over the throne. Then, the other party would be able to take over the entire Jiang city without expending a single soldier. Regardless of the outcome, it was not something that the current Jiang city could bear. You mean? Mu Hongjin asked. Let's prepare for a fierce battle, Xiaoju replied. This topic was too serious. Everyone in the banquet hall was silent for a moment. At that moment, a crisp voice rang out. Grandmother? It was Mu Xiaolu. Mu Xiaolu had already changed her clothes. She was also wearing a bright red robe with golden lotus flowers embroidered on it. It was gorgeous and exquisite. She didn't wear a golden crown. Her two braids hung down in front of her chest, and there was a little ornament on her forehead. She looked like a young Mu Hongjin, a girl from a different race. However, compared to Mu Hongjin's domineering beauty, Mu Xiaolu was more delicate and arrogant. After returning to the familiar residence, Mu Xiaolu was no longer as silent as she was in the Chui residence. She ran over like a little bird and jumped on a Mu Hongjin's soft couch. She nestled beside Mu Hongjin and asked, Grandmother, why isn't Chui Zhongqi here? Chui Zhongqi is busy. Mu Hongjin was much more affectionate when facing Mu Xiaolu. She smiled and patted her head. Your saviors are here. Hurry up and thank them. Mu Xiaolu turned her head and looked at He Yin and Xiaoju. After a while, she said in a small voice, Thank you for saving me. She didn't want to lose face. He Yin didn't argue with her and asked Mu Hongjin, Little Highness, how did you end up in the hands of those bad people that day? Could it be that those bad people had infiltrated the residence? If that was the case, those bad people were too daring. Mu Hongjin looked at Mu Xiaolu. You say it yourself. It's nothing. Mu Xiaolu looked at her grandmother's expression. After a while, she said, I wanted to go to the Water God Festival and didn't want the guards to follow me, so I left the residence. On the way, I met those people who said they could help me get on the Firefly boat. After I got on the boat, I couldn't move after drinking tea. Then I met you. She said it lightly, probably because she was afraid of being scolded by Mu Hongjin. It could be assumed that she had experienced many dangers. However, it was normal for a child of this age to want to play. Mu Hongjin only had this one granddaughter. She was usually very strict, afraid that something would happen to her. It was reasonable for a child to want to go out and play by herself. It was just that her luck wasn't too good and she had been targeted early on. I really have to thank you. Mu Hongjin sighed. If something really happened to Xiaolu, I don't know how to continue living. Your Highness, please don't say that. Little Highness is blessed by the heavens. Even if she didn't meet us, she would have met someone else. She will definitely be safe. Mu Xiaolu heard this and muttered, It wasn't you who saved me in the first place. It was this uncle who saved me. Then, she looked at Yin. That uncle isn't coming today. When can he come? Go back and tell him that I want to see him. Can he come to the residence to play with me? It was the first time Mu Hongjin had heard of such a person. She asked in confusion, What uncle? It's an uncle who looks like an immortal. Mu Xiaolu became happy and gestured to Mu Hongjin. He's very tall and wears white clothes. He's very strong. When I was caught, he knocked over the knife as soon as he appeared. He has a sword and a chain on his back. Mu Hongjin's expression gradually stiffened. He Yin complained incessantly in his heart. He only hoped that this little ancestor would stop talking and not continue. However, Mu Xiaolu seemed to have a good impression of Lu Buwang. Speaking of this, she beamed with joy and wished she could tell Mu Hongjin everything she knew. He also knows how to play the qin. He played the qin for me. It's the song that grandmother often plays. But he plays it much better than you. He said that the song seems to be called Slow Time. Grandmother, why have I never heard you mention the name of this song? Is it really called that? Mu Hongjin looked at Mu Xiaolu and slowly opened her mouth, her voice dry. Since you've seen him, do you know his name? I asked him, Mu Xiaolu replied. He said he's called Layperson Yun Lin, but I heard them all call that person Master Lu. You should ask him. Mu Xiaolu pointed at Xiao Ju. Layperson Yun Lin seems to be his master. I heard Cui Zhongqi ask. Mu Hongjin looked at Xiao Ju. Is that so? Ian was so nervous that his palms were sweating. He heard Xiao Ju reply yes. The banquet hall inexplicably became dull. Mu Hongjin didn't speak and just leaned on the couch. She didn't even notice Mu Xiaolu. Her gaze gradually drifted away, as if she was recalling a distant memory. There was no room for anyone else in her eyes. He Yin thought to himself, from the looks of it, Mu Hongjin and Lu Buwang are not only old acquaintances, but also have a deep relationship. After a long time, Mu Hongjin came back to her senses and said indifferently, I know. She didn't say that she wanted to see him again, nor did she ask about Lu Buwang. It was as if this person was just a passerby who she had forgotten after hearing his name. Her expression returned to calmness, and for a moment, the gloominess also dissipated. She seemed to have returned to the aloof and unreasonable royal highness when they first met. It would be better if she kept asking, but she just let it go. He Yin became suspicious, as if there was a restless cat constantly scratching his heart. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, Are your highness and Layman Yun Lin old acquaintances? Xiao Ju glanced at him with a warning look. He Yin didn't care. Lu Buwang was also her relative. Now that she could finally catch a glimpse of Lu Buwang's past, how could she give up? Besides, Mu Hongjin's expression. At least she wasn't an enemy of Lu Buwang. Mu Hongjin didn't expect He Yin to suddenly ask this. She looked at He Yin, and He Yin looked at her generously. After a while, Mu Hongjin smiled and said, Military Governor Xiao, your subordinate is really bold. Xiao Ju's gaze was clear and indifferent. Your Highness, please forgive me. I haven't said anything yet. You don't have to be so anxious to defend her. Mu Hongjin smiled slightly. It's just that no one has dared to ask this question for many years. Yin found it strange. Was she really an enemy? If she was an enemy, why would Lu Buwang treat Mu Xiaolu so well? After all, Mu Xiaolu and Mu Hongjin were too similar. Facing a face that looked like an enemy, he wouldn't be gentle. Actually, it's no big deal to tell you. Mu Hongjin said lightly, Many years ago, before I got married, I once sneaked out of the prince's mansion. She glanced at Mu Xiaolu and said gently, just like Xiaolu yesterday. But I was very lucky. I didn't meet any bad people. Instead, I met a young man who just came down from the mountain. Her beautiful eyes stared at the painting on the wall in the distance. The painting was like a young girl sitting under a flower tree and weaving a garland. The large peach color was bright and beautiful, just like the spring day of that year. I admired this young man, so I pestered him and followed him with the excuse that I was penniless and had nowhere to go. It was also the first time Mu Xiaolu heard about her grandmother's past. She widened her eyes in surprise. It was the first time I fell in love with someone. Naturally, I was very sincere. However, that young man already had a sweetheart and didn't like me. He was also very cold to me. Father told me that the marriage was set and they would get married in a few days. So I begged the young man to take me away. Hien was so surprised that he couldn't speak. Princess Minji was really bold to elope before marriage. On the day of the appointment, he didn't come. Mu Hongjin said lightly, I was found by father's people and returned to Jiang to get married. After that, I never saw him again. Chapter 143. After Mu Hongjin finished speaking, her expression didn't change, as if she was talking about someone else's matter. Ian didn't feel good. She thought for a while and said, maybe householder Yin Lin didn't come that day because he had something to do. I also made an appointment with someone, but I was delayed by something urgent, so I missed the appointment. There's nothing urgent. There's no misunderstanding. Mu Hongjin smiled and said, he told me this himself. Yin didn't say anything else, but he felt that what Mu Hongjin said wasn't the whole truth. If Lu Buong really had someone else in his heart, ever since Yin met him, he had never seen any other woman. He had also never heard him mention anyone's name. Speaking of which, Mu Xiaolu was the one with the most different attitude, and Mu Xiaolu was Mu Hongjin's granddaughter. Young people always think that they're the unique one. Mu Hongjin smiled and said, I was the same when I was young, but I don't know that being unique or not depends on who sees it. In that person's eyes, I'm just the one who doesn't catch his eye among thousands of people. Your Highness, the person you're talking about is my master? Xiao Ju asked. As Xiaolu said, I can't think of anyone else. Mu Hongjin said, it's just that I didn't expect him to come to Jiang. Yin thought to himself, Princess Mingji guessed wrong. According to the lady boss of the tea house, Lu Buong not only came to Jiang this year, but also every year in the past. However, Lu Buong didn't come to Jiang for Mu Hongjin, right? What's this? Is it better not to meet? Mu Xiaolu curled her lips and said, that person really has no taste. Grandmother is the most beautiful and powerful person in the world, but he's actually willing to let her down? Is he blind? I think he shouldn't be called householder Yin Lin, but householder who has no taste. You. Mu Hongjin poked Mu Xiaolu's head and scolded with a smile. You're so young, but you know what it means to let someone down? He won grandmother's favor, but not only is he not grateful, but he also doesn't take it seriously. If this isn't letting her down, then what is? Serves him right for not being able to marry grandmother. I don't want my grandfather to be such a person. Mu Xiaolu said angrily. She was a child and spoke without fear. It was probably because when she was born, Mu Hongjin's husband had already passed away. Since she had never met him, she didn't have any feelings for him. Thus, when she spoke of this matter, she didn't have any scruples. Sure. Mu Hongjin smiled and hugged Mu Xiaolu. Then, our Xiaolu's future husband must cherish Xiaolu and never let her down. Of course. Yin didn't feel good when he saw the happy and harmonious appearance of the grandfather and grandson. There were thousands of different kinds of people in the world, and the number of people who were destined to be together was like the grains of sand in the Ganges River, innumerable. However, if you were misunderstood and couldn't say it out loud, that would probably be the most regrettable kind. Even the precious delicacies couldn't make her happy. After eating with a heavy heart, Xiao Ju and Yin got up and said goodbye to Mu Hongjin. Mu Hongjin nodded. When she turned to leave, Yin finally couldn't help but look at Mu Hongjin and ask, Your Highness, since you already know that your old friend is now living in the Chui mansion, why don't you ask about his current situation and his experiences over the years? From the beginning until now, ever since she knew that Lu Buong was the person who saved Mu Xiaolu, Mu Hongjin had played down the past and never mentioned this person again, as if Lu Buong had nothing to do with her. Mu Hongjin was slightly startled, and then looked at Yin and said lightly, That's all in the past. As for now, he and I have nothing to do with each other. After the meal, Yin and Xiao Ju said goodbye to Mu Hongjin. After leaving the mansion, Yin couldn't help but look back at the vermilion gate of the mansion and said hesitantly, Your Highness, do you really only treat my master as a stranger now? Xiao Ju said, Love is deep and hate is deep. People who have really let go will not deliberately forget something. What do you mean? I mean, he raised the corners of his mouth slightly. Lady, he really doesn't know how to observe people's expressions when it comes to love. Was this a blow to her? Yin thought besides. How could he blame her? In her previous life, she didn't have any occasion to carefully figure out other people's thoughts, except for the enemy generals. Besides, women's minds were delicate. If a woman really wanted to hide her feelings, she would definitely not let others see through her. You speak as if you know very well, she retorted. A little better than you? He walked forward leisurely, and He Yin hurriedly followed. In the empty hall, the woman in the red robe and golden crown slowly walked up the steps and sat down on the high seat. After Mu Xiaolu finished her meal, she was taken back to her bedroom to rest by a maid. Mu Xiaolu had also received quite a shock yesterday. As a child, she was very tired and sleepy, so Mu Hongjin had someone send her some soup to calm her nerves. Fortunately, Mu Xiaolu was only frightened and not injured. Jiang was plagued by internal and external troubles. Yudo was among them, and the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in the city were in her hands. The current situation really couldn't be considered gratifying. This was originally a mess, but Mu Hongjin actually thought of another name in her heart. Lu Buang. She really didn't expect that after so many years, she could still hear the name Lu Buang from other people. She also didn't expect that Lu Buang would dare to enter Jiang City again. If Mu Hongjin was young, she would definitely stand in front of him, look down at him condescendingly, and ask him to get out of her territory. But now, she didn't have such an impulse, and she didn't even want to see him. On the small table next to the high seat, there was a carved bronze mirror. Cui Yuezhi had found it for her from a merchant. The mirror was extremely thin, and the carvings were extremely beautiful. There was an emerald green opal inlaid on the wooden handle at the bottom. She had always liked complicated and gorgeous things, so she kept it with her every day. Mu Xiaolu always said that this bronze mirror looked old-fashioned, but Mu Hongjin didn't think so. She held the bronze mirror in her hand and looked at the person in the mirror. The woman in the mirror was extremely beautiful. She didn't know when even her makeup had to be as dignified and exquisite. There was a touch of light red at the corners of her eyes, which made her beauty look cold and gorgeous. Her lips were also red and slightly pursed, which made her look restrained and cold. She reached out to stroke her hair. The maids all envied her for her long black hair. Even at this age, she didn't look old. But they didn't know that every morning, she would ask her personal maid to comb her hair carefully under the sunlight, find out the white in her hair, and pull them out one by one. As long as she was still the princess, she would always be young, beautiful, noble, and powerful. She would trample all the restless people under her feet and accept everyone's respectful and sincere gazes. But she was old after all. Mu Hongjin looked at herself in the mirror. Once upon a time, her face was clean and she never put on makeup. Her eyes didn't have the domineering and fierce look now. That girl's eyes were always curved, and when she smiled, she revealed her white teeth. She was brash, hearty, and carefree. Her thoughts flew back to many years ago, so long that she couldn't remember which year it was. At that time, Mu Hongjin wasn't the red-robed and golden-crowned princess. She was the only daughter of King Mingji, the apple of his eye, a 17-year-old girl. The 17-year-old girl was full of imagination about love and the future. When she suddenly learned that her marriage was set and she was going to marry the son of an important court official, her first reaction was fierce resistance. The old King Mingji, her father, looked at her with some guilt, but his tone was undeniably firm. You must marry him to stabilize your position as princess. I don't want to be a princess at all. Mu Hongjin snorted. I don't want to use my marriage to exchange for this position. I'd rather be an ordinary person. Her resistance wasn't taken seriously. Perhaps it was just a child's willful quarrel. Or perhaps King Mingji knew very well that even if she resisted, there would be no result. The position of a vassal king was unstable. If he wasn't careful, no one would be able to escape. Mu Hongjin slipped out of the prince's residence late one night. She had a strange temperament and had long yearned for the life of an ordinary person. She took a horse whip, changed her appearance, and left Jiang City that night. The Mu Hongjin of that year was older than the current Mu Xiaolu, and also more intelligent and shrewd. She didn't suffer any losses along the way. She went all the way to the foot of Qian Mountain. Qian Mountain's mountain path was steep. Bystanders said that there was a barren mountain at the top. However, there was a lush peach forest at the foot of the mountain. It was spring, and the peach blossoms were bright and full of romance. Mu Hongjin was not far from the peach forest when she encountered a thief. Generally speaking, if a girl who was alone didn't disguise herself, it was very easy to encounter a thief with bad intentions. If the girl was a beautiful girl, it was even more difficult to avoid. There were many stories of heroes saving beauties in dramas, and they all originated from this. Mu Hongjin ran and ran, and when she ran under a peach tree, she accidentally sprained her ankle and had nowhere to hide. The thieves grinned and came forward like catching a turtle in a jar. If this was in a drama, at this time, the hero who saved the beauty would appear. The hero who saved the beauty did indeed appear. Stop! At this critical moment, someone's voice was heard. It was a clear male voice. Mu Hongjin looked back and saw a young man in white slowly walking over. His long hair was tied up in a bun with a white silk cloth, and he carried a zither on his back. He had delicate features and an otherworldly appearance, as if he didn't care about the secular world. He blocked in front of her. The thieves were stunned at first, but then they laughed. They thought that this young man looked weak and was just trying to stand out, so they quickly told him to get lost. Mu Hongjin also felt some despair. He looked more like a zither player than a hero. However, the young man just stood there calmly and didn't move. The thieves flew into a rage out of humiliation and wanted to make the young man suffer a little. It wasn't until the young man pulled out the long sword at his waist that Mu Hongjin saw clearly that he actually had another sword. The young man in white was indeed a hero, and he was also a kind hero. His swordsmanship was extremely high, but he didn't take those people's lives. He just stopped and beat them until they fled. Only the two of them were left under the peach tree. In the crimson red, Mu Hongjin looked at the other party. The young man's eyes were calm and indifferent, and his robe was spotless. However, she knew that he was not a zither player, but a chivalrous hero. He jumped out of those thrilling dramas and appeared in front of her, like a divine soldier descending from the sky. He was the young chivalrous hero who saved her. The panic just now faded away, and she smiled with curved eyebrows and eyes. "Thank you for saving me. My name is Mu Hongjin. What's your name?" The young chivalrous hero seemed to be a little surprised by her sudden cheerfulness. He paused and said, "Lu Buang." The girl from Jiang was cheerful and bold, enthusiastic and forthright. Mu Hongjin looked at him with a distressed expression, but a trace of craftiness flashed through her eyes. "Young chivalrous hero Lu, I sprained my ankle and can't walk anymore. Since you've saved me, I'll help you to the end. Carry me on your back." The person in the bronze mirror smiled slightly, and her gaze gradually became distant. When she recalled the peach blossoms that year, she would unconsciously smile. She didn't hold the bronze mirror tightly and accidentally dropped it on the ground. The sound alarmed the woman on the high seat. She bent down to pick up the bronze mirror and was slightly startled. There was a crack on the smooth surface of the bronze mirror because of the fall just now. It was very slight, and if one didn't look carefully, it wouldn't be discovered. The smile on her lips faded. After a while, she put the mirror aside. After all, it was difficult to repair a broken mirror. When they returned to the Chui residence, it was already evening, and Chui Yuezhi hadn't returned yet. Tian was afraid that Lu Buang would leave without saying goodbye, so the first thing she did was to look for Lu Buang. When she found him, she found that Lu Buang was playing chess with Lin Shuanghe. Both of them liked to wear white clothes. Lin Shuanghe looked like a fine young master in a chaotic world, while Lu Buang looked like a noble and otherworldly swordsman. Seeing that Yin had returned, Lin Shuanghe said, "Young master, madam, you're back. Mr. Lu's chess skills are too good. I, Lu Buang, have such high chess skills, but I can't even last 10 moves against him. How many rounds has it been? Young master, why don't you play chess with Mr. Lu and help me win a round?" Yin silently rolled her eyes in her heart. It wasn't that she was bragging about her master, but there was nothing that Lu Buang wasn't good at. He was talented in both civil and martial arts. With Lin Shuanghe's mediocre skills, he could deceive girls in brothels, but compared with Lu Buang, it was simply an insult to Lu Buang. She walked to Lu Buang's side and said to Lin Shuanghe, "Since you've lost so many rounds, Brother Lin should go back and practice well before the next round. I still have something to talk to my master about. Let's talk about it later. After saying that, she pulled Lu Buang up and walked into the room. Lin Shuanghe looked at Yan's back, leaned close to Xiao Ju, and asked curiously, "Why are you in such a hurry? What's wrong with my sister he?" Xiao Ju said, "She want to listen to a story." "What story?" Lin Shuanghe was puzzled. "Did you see the princess in the mansion? How was it? Did she make things difficult for you?" Xiao Ju chuckled and didn't answer. She didn't make things difficult for him, but Yan's gaze fell on the door that was closed by Yan. It was just that this trip was probably an accident for Mu Hongjin, Lu Buang, and even Yan. Cui Jiao was about to go in with the tea, but was stopped by Xiao Ju. His gaze fell on the teapot on the tea tray, and he said, "Change a bowl of brown sugar water hot." Cui Jiao nodded. Xiao Ju turned around and saw Lin Shuanghe staring at him with a strange gaze. He frowned. "What are you looking at?" Xiao Huaijin. Lin Shuanghe looked at him seriously, waved his fan, and said, "You're finished." "You're sick," he replied indifferently. In the room, he pressed Lu Buang to sit down at the table, and he sat down as well. She had a lot of questions, such as Lu Buang's previous words about tracking down the Wutuo people, as well as Jiang's current actions. However, the first thing she said was, "Master, I just came back from the mansion and met Her Highness." Lu Buang looked at her. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Princess Mengji seems to be an old acquaintance of Master." Lu Buang said, "Yes." He admitted it so quickly. She was stunned for a moment. Since he was so frank, did it mean that there was nothing between them? Yan realized for the first time that he was so talkative that he even wanted to know about other people's private affairs. But if it was about Lu Buang, she couldn't help but want to know what kind of past her godlike, seemingly emotionless master had. Perhaps it was this past that made him seem more worldly and more like an ordinary person. Princess Mengji said that she once admired Master, but Master has another love in his heart. Yan simply said it in one breath. Back then, Princess Mengji wanted to escape from the marriage and made an appointment with Master, but Master didn't come. So she returned to Jiyang and got married. Hearing this, Lu Buang was still expressionless, and no one could tell what he was thinking. Yan said, "Master, is this true?" She always felt that with Lu Buang's chivalrous character, who would bury the corpses when he passed by, if Mu Hongjin really begged him, he would definitely take her away. If he didn't intend to take her away from the beginning, he wouldn't have made an agreement with Mu Hongjin at all. Why did he have to do something unnecessary? "It's true," Lu Buang replied lightly. Yan was surprised. "Why? This is the best choice for her." Lu Buang said, "As Princess Mengji, she should bear her due responsibilities, and Jiyang is her responsibility." But Yan was still unwilling to give up. Is it because of this that Master didn't take her away, or is it because of other reasons? Does Master really have another love in his heart? For so many years, she had never seen Lu Buang mention any woman or anyone he loved. To put it bluntly, if that lover was no longer alive, at least Zhongyan would pay respects to her every year during the Qingming festival. But no, there was nothing. Lu Buang didn't answer her, and just looked at Yan with a smile. Is she doing well? Was she doing well? Yan couldn't answer this question. The current situation in Jiang City was really not good. But from a certain point of view, Mu Hongjin was married and had a granddaughter. At least she wasn't as lonely as Lu Buang. She could only say, Xiao Lu is her granddaughter. Lu Buang smiled and didn't say anything. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became silent and stagnant. Outside, Cui Jiao knocked on the door and said, "Madam, the sweet soup with brown sugar balls is here. Why do you still like sweet things?" Lu Buang came back to his senses and laughed. "Go out and drink the sweet soup. I want to be alone for a while." Yan hesitated for a moment, then stood up and said, "Master, I'll go out first." She left the room, and the door was closed behind her. The night in Jiang was also warm, not as cold as the north. The wind blew in from the window, causing the shadows of the trees to sway slightly. It was like the fog on Qian Mountain. Lu Buang had no parents. He was the youngest disciple of Taoist Yunji on Qian Mountain. Taoist Yunji was extremely outstanding. He lived far away and adopted a group of orphans as his disciples. Lu Buwang was ranked 7th and was called Little Seven. The teenagers practiced martial arts on the mountain. When they were 18 years old, they had to go down the mountain to gain experience. When Lu Buwang went down the mountain, his senior brothers all came to see him off. He was proud and simple, and his nature was pure and honest. Everyone was afraid that he would be deceived at the foot of the mountain. Before he left, they gave him a lot of advice, which made him impatient. Every teenager felt that their future was bright, and that they could root out evil in the world and take care of injustice everywhere. There was nothing that could humiliate their temperament or defeat their persistence. Lu Buwang was the same, who knew that as soon as he went down the mountain, he would see evil people bullying a weak woman in the peach blossom forest at the foot of the mountain. Lu Buwang stepped forward, drove away the evil people, and was about to leave, but the woman stuck to him like a dog-skin plaster. He couldn't get rid of her. He still remembered the first time he saw Mu Hongjin. She was so beautiful and charming that one more look at her would make him blush. Her 2 braids hung in front of her chest. She blinked at him and said in an innocent voice, "Young hero Lu, I sprained my ankle and can't walk. I'll help you to the end. Carry me on your back." He was shocked by her self-righteous words. He took a step back and said, "No, why not?" Mu Hongjin said, "Aren't you a young hero? Young heroes all have to do this." Young heroes all have to do this? Lu Buwang didn't understand when he was a teenager. He had been living on the mountain and didn't know the ways of the world, so he didn't know whether what she said was true or not. But looking at her confident look, Lu Buwang thought that maybe the people at the foot of the mountain were all like this. Was he making a fuss over nothing? As he thought about it, he saw Mu Hongjin cry out with a bitter face, "Ouch, ouch, it hurts when I move." He was displeased that she was so delicate. Even Taoist Yunji's daughter, his junior sister, wasn't so delicate. He had no choice but to bend down and say, "Come on up." Mu Hongjin climbed up happily. The girl's hands held his neck tightly. Her warm body was close to him, and he could smell the fragrance of her hair. Lu Buwang felt very uncomfortable. He wanted to refuse, but it was too late. He could only accept his fate and say, "Miss, where do you live? I'll take you back." "I don't have a home." The girl's voice was pitiful. "I was kidnapped here. My home is far, far away. I'll follow you from now on. I'll go wherever you go." Lu Buwang was so shocked that he almost threw her off his back. "What do you mean I'll go wherever you go? Why do you want to follow me?" "Since you saved me, of course you have to be responsible for me to the end," Mu Hongjin said confidently. "Otherwise, you can take me back to my home. My home is in the Shuo capital, which is far away from here. Can you take me there?" Lu Buwang, he really didn't expect that he would save such a big trouble when he saved someone. Were all the people at the foot of the mountain like this? And all the women at the foot of the mountain like this? No wonder eldest senior brother told him before he left, "The women at the foot of the mountain are tigers." Even tigers were scared away by a firecracker. Why couldn't he get rid of this woman? As if reading his mind, the girl leaned close to his ear and said, "Don't be afraid. I don't eat much, and I won't cost you much money. If you take me with you, I won't be a trouble. I beg you, young hero." You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.